Good evening. Welcome back. Tonight we go north. Ice, stolen fire, gods who bleed for the privilege of knowing things. That's where we're headed. The complete story. Or as complete as I can make it in one sitting, which, full disclosure, I am doing later than I planned, with the kind of tiredness that doesn't make you slow, so much as it makes everything feel slightly more true than usual. We'll meet Odin, who gave up an eye, not lost it, gave it, pressed it into a dark well with his own hand and held it there. For one drink of what memory actually tastes like. I find that detail almost unbearable, and I keep coming back to it. I'm not sure what that says about me. We'll meet Thor, hammer always returning, thunder always following, faithfulness as a cosmic law, and Loki who is the knife that cuts whoever picks it up, including himself, especially himself, the kind of necessary that nobody's comfortable admitting they need. 9 worlds, 1 tree. That's the architecture. We'll walk it all the way down from the bright rooftops of Asgard to the deep quiet at the roots where most of us eventually end up. These are old stories. They were in mouths before they were on pages, and then monks copied them down with careful hands even after the faith behind them had changed. The monks kept them. I think about that sometimes. The preserving of a thing you no longer believe, because you can feel that it matters. That's a kind of love, maybe. A strange professional love. They don't sweeten their endings. That's the deal. If you sit with the hard parts, they will give you something real in return. I think that's the deal. I believe it is. Tell me where you're listening from. What time is it there? It matters to me, genuinely, knowing you're out in the dark somewhere, or under the last thin light of a winter afternoon, or that you came here because the day wouldn't let you go, and you needed something else to hold on to for a while. I'm glad you're here. Let the day go. You don't have to be anywhere for a while. Come in. Let's begin at the beginning, which is to say, let's begin at nothing, before land, before sky, before a single measurable moment had the nerve to tick. There was Ginnungagap, the yawning void, the open mouth of what hadn't decided yet. Say it slowly if you want. Ginnungagap. It sounds like, well, I was going to say it sounds like what it is, like a word that opens and doesn't quite close, like a held breath at the edge of something enormous. That's the best I can do with it. I don't know why I flagged it. Just say it. You'll feel it. North of this void, Niflheim, mist and killing cold, an ancient spring, Vergelmere, sending out rivers named for things like cold iron and old dark, Svul, Guntra, Fjörm. They taste of metal. They flow without destination. South, Muspelheim, living flame, a fire giant named Surda, waiting there since before patience was something anyone had to consciously choose. He has always been waiting. He will still be waiting when we get to the end of this story. And what he does there, well, we're not there yet. South heat drifted north. North cold crept south. They met in the gap. Something changed. Ice began to melt, drop by drop, in a darkness that had no name yet for dark. The melt gathered. The first living being came from those drops. He was enormous. Not, I want to be precise here. There's a kind of enormity that's threatening, aggressive, full of will. This wasn't that. He was enormous, the way a sleeping mountain is enormous, drowsy with his own size. He was Ymir, sometimes called Argelmir, and he was the first of the frost giants, and he was not a god. and he did not behave like one. He lay down and slept, and while he slept, from the sweat beneath his left arm, a man and a woman came up, full-formed, from his own 2 feet, coupling together a son. The Norse told it plainly, without flinching, without ceremony. These are just the facts of how life first arranged itself when life was new and hadn't learned to be squeamish. There was no hall for any of them, no vows, just the impersonal fertility of a world still dizzy with the novelty of its own existence. Anyway, a second creature emerged from the frost that didn't become a giant, Odhumla, a cow, enormous, hide shining with cold, and from her udders ran rivers of sweet milk that fed Ymir, a child of ice sustained by a mother of snow. She didn't ask anything of the arrangement. She licked salt from the frozen blocks around her. That was her work. It looked like nothing from the outside, just a large, patient animal doing a small, repetitive thing. But on the first day of licking, a tuft of hair appeared in the ice. Second day, a head. Third day, a complete man, standing free, tall, composed, already carrying the quiet authority of something made for a purpose that hasn't been said out loud yet. Buri, first ancestor of the gods. Let me collect the thread. Buri had a son, Bor. Bor married Besla, a giantess, daughter of someone called Bolthorn. And that name matters. It means something like evil thorn, which tells you everything you need to know about how the Norse understood origins. Even in the first generation, the gods are already made of mixed blood, already kin to the thing that will one day stand across a field from them. They come from both sides. They always have. Bor and Bestla had 3 sons. They're the ones who carry this whole story on their backs from here. Odin, Vili, Ve, 3 brothers. And here is what they bring into the world that Ymir and Audhumla didn't. Intention, will, the capacity to look at what exists and decide to do something about it. Not grow, not feed, do. The world, in this telling, was never imagined into being by a divine mind, thinking cleanly from above. It was built by hands. Hands working with what they had, which was raw material and no instruction. I don't know why I find that so much more honest than the alternatives. Maybe it's late, maybe it's the hour that makes me feel it. Ymir kept begetting more frost giants, not from malice, just from excess. He was a force that overflowed its banks by simply continuing to exist, filling the available space with each new generation of something that needed more room. He wasn't evil in any clean sense. He was a category older than evil. He was uncontained growth, which is a different thing, and not a comfortable one to be standing next to. The 3 brothers grew up, watched, understood the shape of the problem. Here is where I have to slow down, because this next part it's just a confrontation. They came to Ymir. That's the fact of it. 3 young gods, and the first enormous sleeping thing. The text gives no speech, no ultimatum, no dramatic exchange, just the fact of the confrontation. I don't know whether to fill that in or leave it. I'm leaving it. What they did was this. They killed him, and from his body, they built everything. When Ymir fell, the blood was... I don't have a word for it that doesn't undersell it. Catastrophic is the word I keep landing on. It poured out of him and became the oceans, all of them. Every sea you've ever looked at or been afraid of, that came from one body, one wound, and nearly every frost giant drowned in it, in the blood of their own ancestor. If you sit with that long enough, it stops being mythology and starts being something else. Something I can't name from this side of it. One survived. Bergelmer. He got onto. The sources say a wooden chest or a millstone or something like a boat. They can't agree. And I've stopped trying to resolve it with his wife, and they floated to the far rim of the world. That's where the later giants came from. Which means the enmity survived. Which means it was always going to survive because it was in the blood, literally, actually in the blood that made the sea. The brothers went to work. Ymir's flesh became the earth. They packed it into land, firm and inhabitable. His bones became mountains. Teeth and jaw fragments became cliffs, became scree on steep slopes. His broken limbs became boulders in wide valleys, scattered like someone had simply opened a hand mid-air and let them fall. They flung his skull upward and made the sky. I need to sit with that for a second. They flung it. The sky is a thrown skull held up at its four corners by dwarves named for compass directions. Nordri, Sudri, Austri, Vestri, north, south, east, west. Four small stubborn figures with their arms up, holding the dome of a dead giant's head open above us. I don't know why this detail matters to me as much as it does. I kept it. Moving on. From the fires of Muspelheim, they took sparks and kindled them as stars. Fixed them in the sky so darkness would never be total. So sailors and farmers and people who needed to be somewhere would have something to navigate by. The wandering tissues of Ymir's brain they let drift as clouds. I need to pause here. The weather is dead giant cognition. When the sky thickens and goes heavy and something dark moves through it, that's thought, old and cold and enormous, moving through what was once a skull. The Norse looked up at a storm and saw something thinking. That's not a metaphor I'm applying from outside. That's the framework they built the image inside of. The storm is a thought. The clouds a brain. Right, continuing. The brothers hung lights for beauty, but the deeper reason was time. They found a young woman named Sul and set her in a chariot to carry the sun across the sky. 2 horses, Arvaka, early waker, Alsvida, very quick. A shield called Svalin rode ahead of them, so the world below wouldn't simply ignite from proximity to that much brightness. For the moon, Mani, who tends the waxing and waning, who measures the month in phases. Mani is said to have taken 2 children one winter night. They were crossing the cold ground with a pole and a pail between them, and he took them up and carries them still. Bil and Yuki. Children of the moon. I've never known what to do with that detail. It's just there. I've never known why it matters. I kept it. 2 wolves are chasing the sun and moon. That's why they never stop. Skuld after Saul. Hati after Mani. They've been running since the beginning. When the age gets old enough, the wolves close the distance. For now, the chase is the engine. The chase is what keeps the chariots moving. The chase is why you have a morning. Night rides a horse called Hrimfaxi. Frostmane. The dew on the fields at dawn. That's the foam from its bit, falling as it passes. Day rides Skinfaxi. Shining Mane, whose mane lights the sky each morning. The dew is a horse's foam. The sky is a skull. The clouds think. So there. Order had come to a world that recently had no pulse. But order needed walls. The brothers thought about protection, and they used what they had, which at this point was a dead giant and an emerging tradition of not wasting anything. From Ymir's eyebrows, they built a great enclosure around the land shaped for human habitation. Midgard, the middle place, a ring wall between the managed and the wild, between the tended field and the cold old edges where giants gathered and the dark hadn't fully receded. Anyway, beyond the wall, Jotunheimer. Between the two, a dense forest, dark and tangled, growing up like a reminder that the boundary between kin and stranger was drawn by necessity, by choice, by fear. The forest didn't grow there naturally. Separation is always a decision someone made. The dwarves. From the decay of Ymir's flesh came small wriggling things. I'll be honest, the text is sparse here. It doesn't linger. The brothers took them, gave them minds and speech, gave them halls in the deep stone. Mjolnir and Durin ruled in the deep places. The names of the others run in long chains that sound like hammers. Nori, Nirada, Thrain, Levanger. There are lists, long lists. I'm not going to reproduce the lists. They existed. They had names. They went underground and made things. That's the dwarves. The brothers turned to the shore. 2 trees, an ash and an elm, worn smooth by water, stripped of branch and leaf, lying on the beach the way driftwood lies, patient, purposeless, waiting. This is one of the moments in the mythology that I can feel something happening in even when I'm tired, even this late, something that makes me want to slow down and watch it carefully. Because what happens next is they made people. From driftwood, from 2 old battered trees on a beach, Odin breathed into them, breath that makes flesh rise and speak. Vili gave them mind, the waking intelligence behind the eyes. They gave them the outward gifts, shape, voice, hearing, the ability to feel warmth, to smell rain, to taste soul. They stood up from the sand, alive, aware. The man, Asker. The woman, Embla. 2 names, 2 people standing up from a beach inside a world that had been assembled by hand, from a corpse, over what felt like, I can't say how long. Time hadn't been measured yet when most of this happened. It gets sorted later. The brothers placed them inside Midgard, behind the wall made from their ancestors' brow. In that space, they would build and grieve and marry and sing and argue and fail and try and fail again. Fill the earth with voices. That's the project. That's what the wall was for. Then the calibration. The sun arranged so summer couldn't swallow the year. The moon arranged so winter would never last forever. Men taught to count nights by Mani's face, to know seasons by the way light leans differently on the horizon in autumn. And it does, if you've ever noticed. The October light comes in at an angle the July light won't touch. And I'm aware this feeling is not exactly the Norse framework for it. But anyway, the light changes. They named that. They walked over everything they'd made and gave names to things. Morning, noon, evening, midnight, the weeks, the years, the fields and the streams. To name something is to say it's worth distinguishing. To say you've looked at it long enough to know it deserves its own word. There's something in that I find it hard to dress up. It's just true. Under those names, men could plant, poets could remember, the world could be handed forward without dissolving. At the center of everything, a tree, an ash. Its name is Yggdrasil, crown touching a sky that was once a skull, roots drinking the oldest water. The trunk is not just wood, however enormous, and it is enormous. It is the size of an axis. It is the axis. It is the spine of existence. The sap moving through it is the quiet current, holding everything in place. Like a river holds a valley together. by giving it something to arrange itself around. That simile is not quite right. I know it. But it's the closest I have tonight. 9 worlds. That's how many cling to the tree. 9 distinct realms arranged through its layers, the way different birds arrange themselves through different heights of a forest. The canopy, the middle branches, the roots, each claimed by something with different needs, different tolerances for cold or dark or altitude. It is a road, a boundary, a storehouse, a clock. When it trembles, fate trembles with it. When it's well tended, the worlds hold their positions. That's the deal the tree maintains just by standing. 3 roots anchor it. 3 different directions. 3 different sources. The first root reaches toward the plain where gods hold council. Beside it, the well of Urda. And beside the well, the 3 Norns, working without ceasing. Their names, Urda for what has been, Vedandi for what is becoming. Schooled, and here is where I have to slow down. Because schooled is usually translated as what must come, and that word must is doing a lot of weight-bearing work. It's the difference between prediction and structure, between prophecy and physics, and the Norse weren't always careful to let us know which they meant. They carve into wood, score runes into living bark, draw water from the well, and mix it with a white clay that shimmers. I don't know what the shimmer is. The text doesn't say, and I'm not going to invent one. And each day they paint the trunk of Yggdrasil with the mixture so it won't crack. Around their bench, sand, green turf that never withers, because it's watered daily with that same sacred water. It's always green there, always the exact same shade of not dying. This is where the gods come every morning. They ride out from Asgard along the Rainbow Road, all of them except Thor, who wades the rivers on foot, unwilling to subject the bridge to the weight of thunder. I find this detail disproportionately charming. He's not making a point. He's just being reasonable. The bridge is old. He's heavy. He walks. They sit beneath the boughs and give judgment, hear cases, keep things ordered. The tree listens the way a very old thing listens, which is without hurry and without forgetting a single word. The second route reaches towards stone and frost, giant country, where other counsel is kept. Beneath it, the well of Mimir. Let me collect the thread here, because Mimir's well deserves to be handled carefully. It is a dark mirror that has held every thought worth holding since the first thought existed. Everything. Every realization anyone has ever paid for. It sits there, still, full of what knowing costs. Odin came once and asked for a drink. Mimir told him the price. Odin pressed his own eye from his skull. And this is the detail I always stumble at, that it wasn't taken, he pressed it himself into the water, and in exchange drank 1 mouthful. 1. That's all you get. That's the economy of the well. The price matches the depth of what you're buying. You want to understand something at the level it actually exists. You leave something of equal value. You don't get to keep everything. The third route goes down into Niflheim. Mist, cold. The ancient spring Hvergelmir, boiling and churning at the bottom of everything. Serpents move through it, many of them, slow and patient in the cold water. The greatest is Nidogr. He gnaws the root of the ash, has been gnawing it since before patience was a word anyone needed. He doesn't hurry because hunger doesn't hurry. Hunger is older than urgency, older than the particular human experience of wanting something soon. He just chews, steadily, without stopping. I want to say something here about how the Norse understood him, because I think if you flatten him into a villain, you lose the thing that makes him interesting. He is appetite built into the structure of the universe as a reminder that even sacred things are made of material that can be consumed. Wood is wood, even when it holds up the sky. From that deep root flow, the waters that feed the first rivers feed the rain and fog and the morning dew. Older songs call the droplets from Yggdrasil's leaves honeydew, food for bees. Crown gives sweetness. Root takes, growth and rock cooperate. That's a functioning world. That's the only kind of world there is. So there, the tree is full of things. I should be methodical about this, but I'm not sure I have it in me tonight, so I'll do my best. At the very top of the highest branch, an eagle, great wisdom, eyes that see in all directions, farther than sight has any right to reach. Between that eagle's eyes, this is the part that always makes me stop. Between its eyes, perched on the bridge of its beak or its forehead, or wherever you'd perch if you were a small hawk and the eagle was your chosen mountain, sits a hawk named Vedrfölner, as if the sky needs a smaller sky inside it for finer resolution. 2 layers of seeing, nested. I don't know why this image matters to me as much as it does. I just kept returning to it while I was preparing this. A hawk inside an eagle's gaze. Anyway, running up and down the trunk, Ratatoska, a squirrel, busy, irritating, fast, carrying insults and grievances between the eagle above and Nidhugger below. He serves no one's purpose but his own. He leaves scratches in the bark. He makes things worse between parties who are already not getting along. The Norse built gossip into the architecture of existence and gave it a rodent. I find this, I was going to say, comforting, which I think says something about me that I'll leave alone. 4 stags browse the branches, Dain, Dvalin, Dunair, Durathror. Their teeth are the slow abrasion of appetite in the canopy, the constant reduction of the highest parts, complementary, the scholars say, to the gnawing below. The tree is eaten from both ends and tended in the middle, and this is the condition of anything worth maintaining, and there's probably something there worth sitting with, though I'm running low on the particular fuel required for that kind of sitting. Yggdrasil suffers. The poets say so directly. It stands there and endures more than people know. Stags from above, serpents from below. Ratatoska scratching the bark with his endless errand. The Norns pour water and clay every day and do what they can against the erosion. The tree holds. The name itself contains the whole story in miniature, if you know where to look. Yggdrasil, the steed of the Terrible One. Ygr is Odin, one of his names, the one that admits what the wiser names paper over, that wisdom and terror sometimes inhabit the same face, that the god of knowledge is also capable of, well, Drasil means horse, and the horse in question is this tree, because Odin hung himself from it, wounded himself with his own spear, gave himself over to the ordeal, hung there in that ancient technology of self-destruction. I almost wrote something else, pulled back, hung there until knowledge came up through the wood and into him. The runes. He learned the runes this way. The tree carried him through it, carried him the way a horse carries its rider through terrain that would kill a person walking. The tree was his mount. The mount was agony. The destination, was knowing. That's Yggdrasil. That's what stands at the center. 9 worlds in its branches and roots. 3 wells beneath it. 1 squirrel ruining everything. The Norns painting its bark every morning, so it survives 1 more day. It holds. So far, it holds. A tree that holds a god through agony and deposits him into knowledge on the other side is not background scenery. It is a structure that demands something from you just by existing. There is doctrine pressed into the wood, and I want to stay here for a moment because this part matters, and I don't think it always gets the attention it deserves. The center of this universe is a plant that needs daily maintenance. That's the chosen image, a plant. Fate is 3 women who get up every morning and pour water on bark. Before anything else happens, before the gods ride out, before the day accumulates its complications, the Norns are already there, already working. Evil is an old creature that has never once paused in its chewing because you'd prefer to think about something else. And hope is the same water, the same well, poured on the same rough trunk every morning, whether or not it seems to be doing anything. That's the theology, written into the architecture. The map of the Norse universe refuses to be a neat stack. I used to picture it that way before I spent more time with it. Floors in a great hall, one above the next, organized, legible. It isn't. It's a living arrangement wound through and around a tree. And what matters in it is relation. How the realms touch, what passes between them, where the borders grow thin. 9 worlds. Let me walk them. Asgard at the top, where the air is sharp and the ground rings under iron shoes. Home of the Aesir, the divine household, gods of law and war and poetry and the difficult work of judgment. On the field of Yggdrasil, they hold council. Gladsheimer is the hall where the many benches wait. Valaskjalf holds the high seat, Hlidskjalf, from which Odin sees everything, every world, every motion, every small hidden thing that tries to stay hidden. Valhall stands there too. 540 doors, rafters of spears, shields arranged on the walls like the scales of an enormous bright fish. And in those halls, the chosen dead train each day and feast each night, preparing for a war that everyone knows is coming and nobody talks about directly. Heimdallr keeps watch at the bridge's edge. His hearing catches grass growing, wool thickening on the back of a sheep. The image that comes to me is a security system that became a person. But that's not right. That's too flat. What he is a god for whom alertness is not a task, but a condition of existence. He listens the way some people breathe, which is without deciding to. Asgard is a fort that knows what it's defending. Valheimer sits at the same height, its own quarter, home of the Vanir. A different kind of divine, older perhaps, differently oriented. Sea swell and fertile field, and the patient negotiation required to keep things growing. Njordr's hall is Noatun, and the smell of tar and the sound of oars are its permanent atmosphere. Freya moves between both realms easily. Freya presides over Folkvanger, her wide field, where she receives half the noble dead and gives them hospitality without interrogating how they earned it. I need to pause here because I want to give Alfheimr the attention it deserves before I rush past it. Alfheimr is always bright. The light seems to come from inside things rather than falling onto them. And I'm aware that sentence is doing work I can't fully justify, but it's the best I have for what the old verse implies when it calls the light elves fairer than the sun to look upon, quick to music, quick to the art of living things. Alfheimer was given to Freya as a tooth gift. This is a Norse custom, a fine present to mark a child's first tooth. And the point encoded in that gift is that beauty and gentle abundance deserve a seat among the powerful. They gave the bright world to the god of harvest as a gift for growing up. That's a value system. That's a statement about what matters. Midgard in the middle. Its wall of eyebrows. Its ring of encircling ocean where the great serpent lies, curled around everything. Men live here. Their works are brief and earnest. They look up to count by the moon. Look out to read the weather. Look inward to keep faith, because law without memory is just noise with a gavel. So there, Jotunheimer, cold mountains, rivers running black between stone walls, vast and indifferent. Giants live here, and this is where I want to push back against the version of this story that turns them into comedy props, because they are ancient beings with long memories and the particular authority that comes from having been present at the beginning of things. Their strongholds are real. Their riddles are tests, not games. Some are coarse, and some are grave, and some are wiser than the gods who fight them, and the Norse never pretended otherwise. Anyway, Nidavellir, sometimes called Svartalfaheimer, underground in caverns that branch like root systems through the dark. Dwarves work here. Their forges never cool. They are, I don't know how to put this without making it sound smaller than it is. They are the masters of making things that last longer than the intention that made them, of binding fire to form until the form forgets it was ever fire. Whether the dark elves and the dwarves are the same people or neighbors, the old sources leave pleasingly unresolved, which is its own kind of answer. Niflheim, cold, distant. Sound carries poorly there. Breath comes out white. The rivers crawl outward under shelf ice. Muspelsheimer, hot, restless, sparks flying off the floor like an unattended forge. Surtur stands at the border with his flaming sword, and he is going nowhere, has never needed to go anywhere, is simply waiting for the age to arrive at the point he has always known it was arriving at. This is a detail that, if I think about it too long, starts to feel less like mythology and more like I stopped thinking about it too long. Let me collect the thread for the last one, because it deserves to be entered carefully. Hell, Helheimer. The road there goes down and north and grows colder at every step, and it is a long road, longer than it has any business being, as if distance is the last mercy being offered before arrival. The realm is named for its queen, a daughter of Loki, half her body living fair and half the blue-black of deep winter, and she receives all those who came to death by illness, by age, by accident, by the ordinary failures of a body that was always going to fail eventually. She receives them without theatre. Her hall is Eljudnir. Her plate is called hunger, her knife famine, her bed sickbed, her bed curtains gleaming bale, her servants Ganglati and Ganglet move through the halls slowly, as if their joints are made of the last thin light before dusk, the kind of light that barely qualifies, that gives you shapes but not colors, that makes everything in a room look like a memory of itself. That's the household of the dead. Named objects, named servants, named curtains on the named bed. The Norse named everything in that hall, which means they thought about it, which means They looked directly at the place most people prefer to keep peripheral, and they described what they saw there. And what they saw was very quiet and very cold and thoroughly, almost administratively, furnished. 9 worlds, 1 tree, all of it tended and eaten and held, still held. At the cave called Kneiperhelle, a hound named Calm sits and waits. The river Gjöll, the screeching river, runs beneath a bridge called Gjallabru, which glows faintly, and a maiden named Modguda keeps that crossing and asks sharp questions of everyone who comes. Beyond the gate, called Helgrind, lie wide, sunless fields. Most of humanity ends up there, existing in shadow, which is the eventual condition of everything that was ever alive. The 9 worlds don't sit in a neat arrangement. They lace through the ash and touch at edges that shift. The rainbow bridge connects 2. Mountain passes thread another boundary. Wells open on certain nights and let a person step through. The gods travel between realms with a regularity that is almost domestic. They have routes, habits, preferred crossings, appointments to keep. It is a working system. It runs on maintenance and obligation, the way most working systems do. What the whole structure teaches, if you step back far enough to see it whole, is that balance has a specific mechanism, and the mechanism is daily action. The gods hold the center by keeping oaths. The giants test the edges by questioning what claims to be permanent. Men keep their hearts by remembering what they owe the people around them. Dwarves bind intention into form. Elves, and I find this the most quietly insistent of the implied claims, remind everyone that what is made must carry beauty, or it will not last. That's a design principle built into the cosmology. Ugliness fails, not morally, structurally. Cold demands thrift, fire demands discipline, death demands honesty. When each receives its due, the worlds hold. When any part of the system is neglected, the tree groans. Before the first conflict that shook the high field, there is a pause worth entering. A still space between the making and the unmaking, after the world has been arranged, but before it has accumulated enough history to begin arguing seriously with itself. There's a passage in the old poems, and this is one I keep returning to. I'm not sure I can fully explain why. I just find it won't leave me alone. Describing the gods in their early days on the field of Yggdrasil, the whirling field, gold pieces played at board games, laughter that came easily. A time before anyone had discovered how many things can go wrong if you look away for too long. The image is gods at leisure, and leisure in the Norse tradition is the earned rest of people who have just done something enormous and are giving themselves space to understand what they made. What they made was a world from a corpse, light set inside a skull. 2 pieces of driftwood stood up and given names and sent to fill a space enclosed by an eyebrow. Let me pause here, because I want to make sure that lands. The audacity of that sequence, when you hold it all at once, it stops being mythology and starts being something else. A case study in what it looks like to build something real from whatever is at hand, with no blueprint, making consequential decisions under the pressure of a world that needs finishing. I think that's why this part of the tradition has always felt more honest to me than cosmologies built around perfection and intent. These gods are improvising on a grand scale. They're good at it, but they're improvising. The Norse gods are constrained. This is important and the stories never let you forget it. They are very powerful and very old, and skilled in ways that ordinary people can barely measure. They also operate inside a set of limits that press on them from every direction. The prophecies they know will come true, the bargains they've made. Because in this world, a bargain made is a reality that reshapes all subsequent events. Whether you regret it or not, there's no take-back available. The oath is a fact now. Each other, the giants, the materials they work with, which have their own resistances and tendencies, and won't simply comply. This is a theology for craftsmen, for farmers who know the soil has its own opinion, for sailors who've learned that the sea doesn't factor in their plans, for anyone who has ever tried to build something that lasts in a world that is steadily, impersonally wearing things down. Anyway, the board games on Yggdrasil. I want to stay here one more moment. They are practice at reading a field of forces, at seeing moves ahead, at understanding that every placement commits you to a set of subsequent possibilities and closes others off. The gods played at boards and did not know, or perhaps knew, and chose to play regardless, which is a different and braver thing, that they were rehearsing for an ending. The treasures they'd find in the new grass after everything burned were these same game pieces, gold, gleaming, waiting in the turf like seeds that had simply been patient. The earth held them through fire and flood and gave them back. This is one of the most quietly hopeful images in the whole mythology, and I find it almost unbearable in the best way. This image of gold pieces in new grass, this implication that what was good about the beginning survives the middle in some form, waits in the ground, comes back up. It belongs here, in the breathing space, before the argument starts, in the youth of the worlds, when the ash still had the freshness of new growth and the rainbow bridge caught colors that hadn't yet been catalogued. Discord arrived. It came quietly. No horns, no armed column. It walked in wearing a human shape, in the person of a woman the poets named differently, depending on which aspect of her they're reaching for. Gulve, gold drunk. Some call her. Others call her Haida, brightness, the shining one. She came into the hall of the Aesir with a smile that was carrying something behind it, and a craft the gods both wanted and feared, in the particular way you fear a tool you already know you're going to misuse. And the fact that they let her in, that the door opened, that is where the first war in the history of existence begins to load itself, quiet as weather, into the room. She came in. The hall received her. Seda. That's what she brought. That's the craft. And I want to try to describe it properly because it gets flattened in most retellings into generic witchcraft. And it is something more specific than that. More uncomfortable. More worth sitting with. Cider is a household magic and a boundary magic. It sees what is about to ripen and coaxes it to bear. It bends the wind that moves through human luck, not the weather. The luck, the invisible pressure that makes one man's fishing good for 7 years and another man's nets come up empty in the same water. It asks its practitioner to enter a trance, to appear unguarded, to be seen in a posture of openness and vulnerability. For a people who ranked composure and strength above nearly everything, this was the art that most unsettled them, precisely because they could feel what it could do, and they could feel themselves wanting it, and they could not stop. At first, the hall filled with a kind of glittering abundance that the gods found extraordinary. Purses grew heavy fast. Words could be made to land softly or to cut quietly without any raised voice. The gods thought they were, no, they thought they had taken command of something. They were its delighted apprentices, which different, though they didn't know the difference yet. Then they felt what it required. Seda asked that someone sit apart and go somewhere the watching eye cannot follow. It asked that the strong practice openness, which is precisely what the strong find most difficult and most threatening to their sense of themselves. It asked that desire be named honestly and without armor. For the Aesir, a people of formal law and clear spearwork and structured song, this was too useful to abandon and too costly to honor. They resolved the contradiction the way powerful people often resolve contradictions that make them uncomfortable. They tried to kill it. They hurled spears at the woman, burned her in their own hall. 3 times. In the way of old certainties, the way the number 3 meant this is permanent now. This is done. Each time she rose from the ash, looked at them, the expression of someone who has survived worse and finds the attempt more tedious than frightening. She did not rage. She waited. Names in these stories are states of being. I find myself needing to say that clearly before continuing, because the names here are the argument. If she is Gulve, gold drunk, then golden speech and the hunger that abundance produces in people who have tasted it refuse to die. If she is Haida, brightness, the shining one, then brightness itself declines to be extinguished simply because someone would prefer the dark. Both names say the same thing. Some forces outlast the decision to destroy them. They persist until met by something of equal and lawful strength. Burning is not that. The gods had discovered this. The Vanir heard what had been done to their priestess. Their anger was cold and thorough and wasted no words on theater. They made ready for war. I need to pause here. The first war of the gods. I want to describe it properly, and I'm aware that the sources don't give me much to work with. There's no preserved sequence of battles, no commanders, no standards planted in the dirt. And part of me is frustrated by that, and part of me suspects it's actually more accurate, that the memory of a very old war would survive as impression, as damage, as the feeling a scar leaves when you can no longer remember the original wound. What survives is the shape the war pressed into the world. The walls of Asgard shook and split. Spears lay in fields like reeds after a flood. The Aesir was strong in open contest, the kind of confrontation that ends when one side physically cannot continue. The Vanir moved through their counters like a change in weather, which is to say there was nothing to strike at directly. And by the time the Vanir had passed through a position, everything in it was different, and the difference couldn't be reversed. 2 philosophies of keeping. The Aesir, oath and iron. The Vanir, gift and patient attention. Neither philosophy could bring the other to its knees. Anyway, the war ran through seasons. Down in Midgard, men felt it without knowing what they were feeling. Seed failed in fields where it had always grown. Fish came up in nets and then stopped coming. Marriages that should have been easy soured. When large things are in conflict, the middle world pays the difference. It always pays the difference. I don't know whether the Norse embedded that as a lesson or just as description, but either way it's true. and it sits in the story with the particular weight of things that are true. Neither side could end it. Eventually, they called for parley. They met on open ground, good sight lines, not much cover. Even gods prefer not to be ambushed during negotiations. The Aesir said, "We cannot pretend that luck and desire are outside the order of things. We cannot burn cider out of existence." The Vanir said, "Abundance without structure doesn't hold. Field and womb and wind need a house strong enough to stand a storm." Each side could describe the other's failure with precision. Each side could see clearly what they couldn't do alone. They agreed on peace. Peace between divine houses. And this is the part that feels almost too blunt to be ceremonial, almost embarrassingly literal for something so consequential, like sealing a treaty with a firm handshake and meaning every bone in it. Peace between divine houses is a ritual binding that leaves no room for interpretation. Both parties stepped to a great vessel and spat into it. Both of them, their breath, their sustenance, the most direct material expression of their living selves. It cannot be faked. It cannot be delegated to a representative. You do it yourself or you haven't done it. When both sides contributed to the same vessel, they were, in the most exact sense available, mixing themselves together, making something that was made of both. From that mixing, calm and bright-eyed, at ease in the world, the way only a being carrying no internal contradiction can be at ease, there rose a figure, Kvasir. The name means something like ferment, the mash, the thing produced when two things are pressed together until their boundary dissolves. He stood there, made of enemies, and looked out at the world with clear eyes, and he already knew everything worth knowing, and he was going to be the most extraordinary thing in it, briefly, for a very short time, before someone decided that what he contained was worth more extracted than walking around. But that comes later. For now, he stood, calm, complete, made of a piece that two sides had sweated to arrive at, made of what it cost them both to stop. He walked. That's what Kvasir did with what he was. He visited halls and smoky forges and the ordinary margins where people worked through ordinary problems. And when arguments settled around him, it was because his answers held weight, not because they were smooth. The test of a good answer is that it survives pressure. His did. He could hold both sides of any question simultaneously and speak from the place where they overlapped, which sounds simple and is the rarest thing there is. The covenant needed more than Kvasir to seal it. Both sides exchanged honored guests. From Vanaheimr, Njörður, who knows coastlines and the patient courage of anyone who has made a living from the sea. His children came with him. Freya, who carries the warmth that wakes seed in cold ground. Freyja, who carries the most complete mastery of Seder ever offered as a formal gift between peoples. And I want to linger on that for a moment, because this is not a small thing. This is the Vanir handing the Aesir the very craft they had tried 3 times to burn out of existence, handing it over as a peace offering, as if to say, here, try again, try holding it this time without flinching. From Asgardr went Hrungnir, a chief of noble bearing. With him went Mimir, keeper of an old head full of counsel. For a time, the exchange worked. In Asgardr, the Vanir presence brightened fields and made marriages hold and ships find their ports. In Vanaheimr, Hrungnir's judgments were admired for their speed and clarity. Then the Vanir found the weakness. Patient, practical people always find weaknesses the same way, by watching what happens when a critical support is removed. When Mimir was away, Mjolnir stopped deciding. He would look at the ceiling and say others should judge. He was a figurehead, beautifully made, no engine. The Vanir had received a horse that would only pull if the right groom stood close enough to breathe on the bit. They were not amused. They cut off Mimir's head and sent it back to Asgard. This is the kind of statement that requires no covering letter. Grief in Asgard expressed itself as work. Odin took the head, anointed it with herbs against decay, spoke the charms that keep speech from fading, set it somewhere that could be called a place of honor, and consulted it the way a king consults the one advisor who will actually tell him the truth. Mimir answered, spoke into Odin's ear with the same measured counsel it had always given, freed now from the inconvenience of a body, from court politics, from everything except the pure act of knowing and saying what is known. I need to pause here. There is something in that image, the preserved head, the ongoing conversation, the king who keeps talking to the advisor everyone else thinks is gone, that I find very difficult to describe without either making it grotesque or making it sentimental. And it is neither of those things. It's a story about what Odin does with loss. He doesn't perform grief. He makes the thing he lost useful. He keeps it working. I don't know if that's admirable or I'll leave it there. Kvasir, meanwhile, kept walking. He hadn't arrived at his particular ending yet. The story doesn't rush him toward it. He walks through it for a while, answering questions, settling things, being what he was made to be. I find myself reluctant to move him along. He is one of the genuinely good things in this mythology, and there aren't so many of those that you can afford to hurry past them. Anyway, the war ended. No winner. A recognition, instead, that neither household could sustain itself without what the other knew. Iron law, without increase, withers into rigidity and dies of its own stiffness. Increase without structure spoils, goes soft, loses its shape. The pantheon became one thing, mixed, complementary, and the world was richer for the war, which is the kind of sentence that feels wrong to say, and is true anyway. A longer conversation might have arrived there more cheaply. It didn't get the chance. After the war came the question of the walls. Asgard was still partly broken. The ramparts needed serious work. The gods sat on Yggdrasil and talked about stone, which is to say, they talked about the particular problem of being powerful and exposed at the same time, of having enemies who had just proven they could shake your foundations, and knowing those enemies were still out there, still watching the gap in your defenses. While they debated, a stranger arrived, broad-shouldered, close-mouthed, the kind of craftsman who lets the calluses introduce him. He listened to the problem and made an offer. One wall around all of Asgard, thorough enough that no giant force could scale it, finished in a single winter. His price landed in the hall like cold water poured down a warm back. Freya as his bride, the sun, the moon. The silence after this was the kind that lets every person in the room hear their own thinking. They would have refused outright. To agree would have stripped the world of warmth and harvest light, would have handed the sky permanently to winter, would have been... I almost wrote something about what it would have meant for Freya specifically, and pulled back because the mythology doesn't frame it that way, And I shouldn't either. It would have been catastrophic. But before the refusal could form, Loki spoke. Loki argued for acceptance on conditions tight enough to guarantee failure. An impossible contract is as good as no contract. Let the stranger try, but bind him sharp. The wall complete by the first day of summer, the builder working entirely alone. No man permitted to help. Fail by so much as a single stone left unset. Collect nothing. The gods agreed. The conditions were set. The mason accepted. Then he made one quiet request. He wanted to use his stallion to haul the great stones. The horse's name was Svadilfari. The gods looked at one another. A horse was not a man. They permitted it. That small concession, a horse, not a man, a technicality, a reasonable sounding accommodation reached in a room full of people who believed they had already won, is where a very large story begins to move. The work started immediately. Through short winter days and long winter nights, the builder and his horse went to and from the quarry. Svadilfari hauled loads that should have broken him at a pace that had no business being possible in any season, and the wall rose clean and plumb, each stone fitted with the care of a craftsman who has nothing in his mind except the work directly in front of him, which is its own kind of terrifying focus when you are watching it and beginning to understand that the deadline might actually be met. The gods watched the wall rise. They did the counting. They felt the first movement of what miscalculation feels like when it is still early enough to see it arriving, but not, they were realizing, early enough to stop it without help. The hall grew uneasy. Winter thinned. The sun began to remember its schedule. With only a few courses left to set, the gods looked at the wall and understood that they had miscalculated the miscalculation. They called a council. They looked at Loki until the weight of all that looking became a kind of formal request. He had suggested the bargain. He would prevent the payment. Loki raised his hands in a way that suggested everyone was being dramatic, said he would attend to it personally, and left. That night, the builder harnessed Svadilfari and went to the quarry in the dark. Snow blew and undisturbed under the stars. From the tree line at the edge of the quarry came a sound, the kind that arrives before you can identify it, that moves the ears before the mind catches up. A young mare stepped out of the birch grove, small, quick, and she smelled of spring grass and something the stallion had not thought about in some time. She looked at him, turned, and walked a little deeper into the trees, looked back. Svadilfari tore free of the trace chains. The sled sat where it had been. The stone sat on the sled. The great horse went into the shadow of the birches, and the builder ran after them through the dark, cursing, until it became clear, and it became clear fairly quickly, that he was not going to catch an animal whose priorities had been thoroughly rearranged. All night, nothing hauled. All the next day, nothing set. The deadline arrived. The final courses remained. When the gods confirmed that the contract had failed by exactly the margin Loki had promised, they arranged their expressions and waited. The builder's patience, maintained across an entire winter of solitary hard work, came off him all at once. He threw it aside, and what was underneath was his actual shape. A Jotun, frostfolk, a mountain giant who had spent the season wearing the costume of an honest working man. The moment the costume dropped, the polite negotiation was finished, and everyone in the hall understood that simultaneously. they called Thor. He came out with a hammer. The giant skull rang once and broke. The body fell among the stones he had fitted so precisely. The echo of that blow moved out beyond the wall he had very nearly finished. Asgarda had its rampart. Freya kept her freedom. The sun and moon kept their courses. So there. Some months later, Loki walked back across the high field with a foal following at his heels. 8 legs. The kind of easy carriage that belongs to something that has no need to negotiate with terrain, because all terrains present the same problem to it, which is no problem. Sleipnir, the world's finest horse, light-footed on air and sure on sea. Loki had been the mare. He presented the foal to Odin without excessive ceremony. Odin accepted it without excessive comment. I need to pause here, because I'm aware this part of the story gets told very quickly in most retellings, moved through with a kind of embarrassed speed, and I think that speed is the wrong instinct. Not because the circumstances aren't unusual, they obviously are, but because the thing produced is Sleipnir, who will carry a messenger to hell and back, who will carry Odin over water and over the dreams of men, and the origin of an extraordinary thing deserves to be sat with, even when the origin is uncomfortable to describe. The Norse sat with it. They told it plainly. I think that matters. A scandal had become a treasure. The embarrassing thing and the extraordinary thing turned out to be the same thing, depending on which part of the story you're standing in. The Norse understood this alchemy. They built it into several of their best stories. Anyway, the new wall had barely set in its mortar when Loki crept behind Sif while she slept and sheared off her hair. He did this because it amused him. The reason shrinks the more time you give it. He found it funny. That's all there is. In the morning, the hall found Sif shorn, and Thor. And I find it hard to describe Thor's anger precisely because it is so total. It is weather rather than mood. It fills every available space. Thor rose from the bench like something large making a final decision. He took Loki by the collar and promised, with considerable specificity, to detach various parts of him from the rest if the gold hair was restored to Sif's head exactly as it had been, growing and living and shining as though nothing had happened. Loki bargained for time and went down into the earth, to the sons of Ivaldi first, craftsmen who work in caverns that smell of heated metal and old coal, and who respond well to flattery when it is delivered with enough apparent sincerity. Loki had sincerity of a functional kind. He made his promises, the kind that sound more valuable before the work is finished than after, and they drew gold out fine as thought, spun it into hair finer than ripe wheat catching afternoon light. And this is the gift I find myself most drawn to in this whole sequence, for reasons I haven't entirely worked out. This hair, when placed on Sif's head, would take root and grow and shine and never dim. Living gold, a scalp of permanent harvest, from the same forge, while the work was going well, and Loki was in the mood of a man who has already won. 2 more things came. A spear called Gungnir for Odin that would always strike true. A ship called Skidbladnir for Freya, broad-decked and reliable on any sea. And when folded, the part that staggers me every time, the part I want someone to explain to me properly. When folded, it fits in a pocket, a ship in a pocket. Freya carried the sea in his coat. 3 gifts. Loki held them and felt the warm pressure of a situation going well. This is precisely when he made his mistake. He crossed to another forge. Two brothers worked there with fewer words and more concentrated stillness, Sindri and Brokkr. Loki spoke the way merchants speak when the market is about to close and they want one more sale before it does. He boasted. He laid a wager. His head, his actual head, the one currently attached to his neck and containing everything he needed to continue being Loki, against the claim that the sons of Ivaldi had produced treasures beyond the power of these brothers to equal. The brothers looked at him. They looked at each other. Brokkr sat down at the bellows. Pride met craft, and they reached an agreement. The brothers would try. Sindri laid iron on the anvil, told Brokkr to work the bellows without pause, no matter what came, no matter what interruption arrived. Keep the bellows moving. Loki changed shape into a fly and got to work on the interruption. As the first piece glowed in the heat, he fastened onto Brokkr's hand and drove the sting in hard. Brokkr kept the bellows moving as though the bite registered somewhere below his attention, as though his hands and the wind they made were a separate system from the part of him that could be heard. Sindri lifted the lid. A boar stood there, golden bristled, its coat shedding enough light to run a night forest as bright as midday. Kulimbursti, a mount for Freyr, swifter than horses, tireless in the dark of winter. I find this one of the stranger and more beautiful things in the whole mythology, and I'm not sure I can say why. A golden boar that lights the dark, that seems too strange to be useful and turns out to be essential. It just does something to me. Moving on. Sindri set gold in next and warned Brokkr about the bellows again. Loki went at the back of the dwarf's neck and drove the sting in until blood came. Brokkr did not falter. From the mold, a ring of perfect gold, heavy, flawless, Draupnir, every 9th night. 8 rings of equal weight fall from it. Measured, reliable abundance. Wealth that tells you it will return rather than asking you to hold your breath waiting. Third work, iron in the heat. Sindri told Brokkr this time failure would cost them everything. Loki fastened onto the eyelid and bit until blood blinded the eye. Brokkr brushed at it, and for just that one moment, less than a breath, the bellows slowed. Sindri lifted the product, examined it. The head was perfect, temper that would never crack, weight exactly right. The handle was short. One moment's interruption had cost it a proper haft. The hammer had a name the universe would come to know. Mjolnir, the Crusher. I need to pause here, because this is one of those moments where I want to be careful not to rush through the judgment that follows. Since the judgment is actually the point, and I think it gets treated as a formality when it isn't one at all. Both sets of gifts came up to Asgarda. The gods examined everything with the seriousness of people who have seen the results of being careless about what they value. The spear was handled, the ship was unfolded, and I can only imagine what that moment looked like in a hall full of gods, watching a vessel large enough to carry an army fold itself down to something a man could carry in his coat pocket, which is either the most extraordinary piece of craftsmanship ever produced or a violation of something. I genuinely can't decide which, and I think the Norse would say that's the correct response. The hair settled onto Sif's head and took root immediately. The boar was brought forward, the ring weighed, the hammer lifted. The judgment, the hammer outweighed everything else, every other gift combined. Not because it was more beautiful. The ship was more beautiful. The ring was a perfect thing, geometrically and spiritually flawless in a way that's hard to articulate. The hammer was short-handled and had been made under sabotage, but it would stand between Asgarda and its own ending. It would be the last argument when all other arguments were finished. When giants came over the ice, and the gods knew they would come, they were always coming. The question was only the timing. Mjolnir would be there. You judge a tool by what it's for. Broker demanded payment. Loki's head was pledged. Loki smiled. He conceded the head might be forfeit. However, and this is the clause, the specific beautiful clause, his neck had not been part of the wager. You cannot take the head without crossing the neck. The neck was outside the contract. The gods appreciated the logic. They were not disposed to reward it, but they couldn't find the fault in it either. Broker denied the head, took the next available thing. He took a thong and a sharp implement and sewed Loki's lips shut, so that for a time the hall rested from remarks that cut deeper than they appeared to. Anyway, when the stitches came out, the scar stayed. The mouth kept going. The wit kept going. But the scar was visible, and everyone could see it. And I think the Norse understood something specific about that image, about wit that keeps running after it's been punished for running, about a mouth that bears the evidence of what it cost and opens anyway. The gifts were distributed with ceremony. Sif's gold hair fell shining. Odin took Gungnir and Draupnir. Freya took the ship and the boar. Thor lifted Mjolnir and felt. The old verses imply that his hand had found the shape it was always intended to close around, a hammer that returns when thrown, that blesses marriages and births with the same weight it brings to battle, that cracks skulls and consecrates cradles. Both. The Norse were very clear that it was both. The hall breathed more easily that evening. Among Odin's many names, and he has more than any other figure in this mythology, a different name for each face he shows the world. There is one that surfaces whenever wisdom is the subject. Yg, the terrible. The name admits what the gentler titles smooth over, that wisdom and terror share a face sometimes. That the path to clear sight does not spare the person walking it. Odin wanted to see clearly more than he wanted anything else. He understood that courage is, and here I want to be precise because the Norse were precise about this, courage is common enough, valor is widely distributed, but genuine understanding of the grain of the world, the angle of the light through it, the deep structure of cause and consequence beneath the surface of events, that is rare, and Odin had decided he would have it at whatever cost presented itself. He went to the well of Mimir. The road goes outward toward giant country, where the stones hold their cold and the wind thins to almost nothing. Mimir sits there, rooted to the deep water. A keeper who does not adjust his terms for fame or kinship, or the particular pressure of a god standing in front of him, asking. The water is a reservoir of memory gathered since the first moment anything happened. It does not offer shortcuts or summaries. It gives pattern, the deep arrangement of cause and consequence that lies beneath events, the way bedrock lies beneath soil, invisible until something cuts deep enough to find it. And it gives this only to those willing to carry what knowing that pattern actually weighs. Odin asked for a drink. Mimir told him the price. Odin stated his request the way a king states a claim. plainly, without apology for wanting it. Mimir named the price. 1 eye, left in the well. Odin pressed it from the socket and placed it in the spring. The water took it. It sank slowly through the dark and has not stopped looking since. An eye that sees inward and backward now, that reads the roots of events rather than their surfaces, that has been watching from down there in the cold dark for longer than most things have existed. He drank 1 mouthful. In that 1 mouthful he tasted. And here is where I run out of the right words. And I want to be honest about that other than paper over it with something that sounds good. He tasted the way fate grows like lichen on stone, slowly, without anyone noticing, adhering to a surface that was there long before the lichen arrived. He saw that counsel is only useful before the spear is already in the air. He understood that even the wisest rulers pay for their wisdom with something that does not grow back. He walked away sharpened. The sharpening did not look like humility or gentleness. It looked like a blade after the blunting parts have been removed. He turned to another kind of learning. At the great ash, he chose a branch that leaned out over the dark. He wounded himself with his own spear, deliberately, with precision, giving himself to himself as an offering, which is a formulation that should be stranger than it sounds and somehow isn't, and hung there 9 nights and 9 days. Nothing eaten, nothing drunk. Eyes fixed downward through the dark, and the wind moving through the branches around him. Near the end of those 9 nights, he looked down into the space beneath the roots, the place where things show their fundamental shape, and he saw what was moving there. Forms of power, turning in the dark the way fish turn in deep water where the light barely reaches, present and purposeful, and completely indifferent to being observed. These were the runes. I need to pause here because I want to describe what the runes actually are in this framework, and it matters, and it's easy to flatten into something smaller than it is. They are not letters. Each rune is a small covenant between will and world, a stroke that, properly known and spoken, persuades the material of existence to behave in a specific way for a specific time. Together, they form something like a grammar of reality, a set of principles that, if understood at sufficient depth, allow you to participate in the way the world arranges itself, rather than simply being arranged by it. That's the distinction the Norse were drawing between things that happen to you and things you're part of making happen. The runes sit at that boundary. He reached down and seized them. He fell from the branch, stood on the ground, changed. Afterward, he taught the names and uses to those capable of carrying them without folly. He kept the hardest workings for himself. The charm for closing a wound, the charm for freeing a hostage without breaking the chain, the charm for cooling a blade without touching it, for tying a knot in the wind so a sailor can buy a breeze when the sea goes still. These are the things you can do, and the old poems say, when you have hung in the dark long enough and paid for what you found there. He sent his ravens out each dawn, Hugin, thought, Munin, memory. They fly the full circuit of creation and return to his shoulders at evening, carrying the grain of what the day held. What was dared, what was promised, what was tried on dark roads and bright ones. He listens while the feast goes on around him, breaking bread with the wolves at his feet, keeping his appetite for something other than food. Let me collect the thread. Peace had given the gods time to think, and from thinking had come Kvasir, who had been walking ever since, visiting farmsteads and smithies and the halls of giants and the workshops of dwarves, teaching without condescension, waiting when a slow listener needed time to find the thread, demonstrating by his continued existence that the truce between the Aesir and Vanir had been something more than a formality. He was the living proof of it. Anyway, wisdom draws love. It also draws envy, and envy in this mythology tends to be practical rather than passive. It makes a plan. Two dwarves named Fjalar and Galar invited Kvasir to their bench and killed him. They drained his blood into a great kettle and 2 vats, mixed it with honey in the proportions that produce something other than sweetness, and brewed from it a mead of such power that a single thoughtful drink would give a person poetry, scholarship, and the quick particular understanding that lets someone speak with precision about difficult things. They named the vessels Odrerir, Borden, and Son. They had made the finest thing in the world from the finest person they could find. They were proud enough of this to become careless. A giant named Killing came next. They drowned him for amusement. When his wife wept, they dropped a millstone on her from above a doorway. I'm going to say that again, because I think it needs to sit for a moment. They dropped a millstone on a grieving woman from above a doorway, and the story records this the way it records weather, as a fact about the kind of people Fjalar and Galar were, which is the kind who do not distinguish between cruelty and entertainment, and never have. Killing's son was named Sutunga. He came for justice, and he came with the patient authority of someone who has already decided what the outcome will be. He set the 2 dwarves on a skerry at low tide and watched the water rise around them. They purchased their lives with the mead, handed it over with the expressions, I imagine, of people intending to find a way to get it back. And Sutunga carried the 3 vessels inland to a mountain called Hnitbjörg, cut a chamber from the living rock, and left his daughter Gunnlod there alone to guard it. Odin heard of the mead the way Odin hears of most things worth knowing, completely, and with immediate understanding of what it meant. The mead held something beyond a pleasant evening. It held the ordered fire that teaches the tongue to name things truly, which is the closest a person gets to seeing them clearly, which meant it belonged in Odin's reckoning, in the reckoning of a god who had pressed his own eye into a well and hung 9 nights from a tree for a fraction of what that mead contained in 3 vessels in a mountain. It belonged in the hands of those who could use it. He put on a plain hat, a traveling cloak, gave himself a working name, Bulverka, the doer of difficult deeds. He walked out into the world wearing it like a tool he'd already decided how to use. He arrived at a farm where 9 men were cutting hay with scythes that had gone slow and dull. He produced a whetstone from his belt and made a few strokes on each blade. The edges sang. Every man wanted the stone. He threw it up into the air between them. They fell over each other, reaching for it, and managed to kill each other in the green summer field. He walked on, Baugi's farm, Sutunga's brother, standing in an empty field with the expression of a man who has just lost his entire labor force to circumstances he hasn't finished understanding yet. Bulverka offered to do the work of all 9 through the season in exchange for one thing. When the harvest was done, Baugi would go to his brother and ask for a single drink of the mead as payment. Baugi agreed. Bolverker worked. He did not tire. When the harvest was finished, Baugi went to Suttungr and made the request. Suttungr refused. He had paid dearly for those vessels, and he was not in the business of generosity with things that had cost him. Bolverker produced an auger called Rati. If they couldn't reach the mead through the front, they'd go through the rock. Baugi bored, where directed. When he said the hole was through, Bolverker blew into it, and the dust came back in his face. He asked Baugi to bore again. The second time, the dust flew inward. They were through. Bolverker became a serpent and slipped into the narrow cut ahead of Baugi, who struck at him with the auger and struck too slowly, the way you always strike too slowly at something that has already decided to go. I need to pause here, because what happens next is a part of the story that I find genuinely difficult to navigate, not because it's obscure, but because it requires holding two things at once that resist being held together, and I want to try to do it properly rather than rush past it. In the chamber beyond the cut, Gunnlod sat on a stone bench before the three vessels. She had been alone there long enough that solitude had become its own kind of presence, filling the room the way cold fills a room, not as an absence of warmth, but as a thing with its own weight and character. She was not foolish, she was alone. These are different conditions, and the second one changes a person's calculations in ways that are very hard to map from the outside, which is something the Norse understood, and something I think they were trying to say here, and I'm not entirely sure the story emerges from it cleanly, but I kept it. I kept it because I think it matters that it doesn't emerge cleanly. Odin came to her as a young man. He sat down. He spoke with gravity, and he listened when she spoke, which, as it turned out, she had not had occasion to do in some time. He stayed 3 nights. On the third morning, Gunnlod opened the vessels and gave him 3 drinks, 1 from each. He put his mouth to Odrerir and drank it empty. He drank Bodden to the last drop. He drained Son completely. 3 vessels, 3 drinks, all of it inside him. He became a great eagle and threw himself toward the light with wing beats that shook the stone chamber loose from itself. Suttungr heard the sound, took eagle shape, gave chase. 2 enormous birds crossing the sky above fjords and fell fields, and people below shaded their eyes and looked up and couldn't say afterward what they had seen exactly, only that the noon had darkened for a moment, and then the moment was gone. In Asgard, the gods saw Odin arriving fast, carrying something that could not be allowed to fall. They set vats near the rampart and called out to him. He crossed the wall, folded his wings, spat the mead into the waiting vessels. Suttungr reached the wall with nothing left to do. Not all of it made the crossing. A few drops fell during the flight, scattered across the fields below, lost in the grass, or found by whoever happened to be standing in the wrong place at the right moment. These, and this is one of my favorite details in the whole mythology, and I want to say that plainly, these stray drops are said to be the portion available to poets who mistake speed for insight, scholars who carry many facts and very little sense. The dull hack's inheritance, the genuine article stayed with the gods and was poured out in season. Anyway, from that day the Skalds called poetry Kvasir's blood, the draught of Odrerir, the cargo of the eagle. Every kenning they threaded onto a cord was a small proof that they had drunk from the right well, that the fire in the language came from somewhere real. Odin poured from it to the youth who could listen past the point where others stopped, to the woman who recited law so clearly that quarrels ended at the first word, to the farm boy whose verses kept men rowing through sleet, to the craftsman who cut runes with a grace that made a hall feel sound when the storm arrived. When a scold was turned away, the story doesn't frame it as cruelty. You water the fields that have prepared their soil. Now, Thor goes out into the world the way weather goes out, without apology, without excessive planning, into the wide country with a hammer on his belt and something large on his mind that usually turns out to be a giant in need of addressing. He travels by chariot, 2 goats, names that crack like dry sticks when you say them, Tangrisnir and Tangjorster. They are slaughtered for supper when night catches him in the wilderness, and the bones are laid out on the hide with care, and in the morning the hammer comes up over the remains, and the goats stand up again, shake their ears, ready to pull. The rule is simple, and the only rule: do not break the marrow bones. A farmer's son once broke one, cracking into the leg for the sweet core inside, encouraged to do it by Loki, who, I find it difficult to describe Loki's involvement in these smaller incidents without landing on a word that makes him sound more comic than he actually is, because the pattern of what he does, taken over the full length of the mythology, is not comic at all. But in this particular moment, he is essentially a bad influence leaning over a child's shoulder in a barn saying, "Go on," and the child does. The son cracked the bone. In the morning, one goat came up limping. Thor's face, the story implies rather than describes, was a forecast for the immediate future. He forgave the family. He took their children instead, a boy named Thjalfi and his sister, Röskva. Thjalfi traveled at Thor's side from then on, running errands with the speed of someone who understands exactly what he owes and intends to pay it fully every day until the debt is settled or the world ends, whichever arrives first. With Loki and Thjalfi at his side, Thor traveled east into giant country. One evening, they found a large hall, 5 rooms opening off a central space. No smoke hole, no hearth, floor sloping oddly, smell peculiar. They slept there. Near dawn, the earth shook and the walls groaned, and something enormous moved outside. Morning, a man asleep in the valley, large enough that the hall where they'd sheltered was the thumb of a glove he dropped from his belt. The giant woke and said his name was Skrymir, and he offered to share the road. At evening, he gave Thor permission to open the food sack for supper. The knot refused everything Thor applied to it. He pulled until his hands hurt, used his teeth, applied every principle of leverage he understood. The bag did not open. Hunger and blocked effort produce a specific condition in Thor, and that condition produced a hammer blow to Skrymir's sleeping head that should have felled a mountain. The giant opened one eye and asked mildly whether a leaf had fallen. 2 more blows before dawn. Each time, leaves. Twigs, mild inquiry. 3 deep dents were later found cut into a nearby hillside where the blows had actually landed, deflected by an illusion. This was not yet known. At the edge of a plain, Utgarda, walls so tall Thor had to lean his head back to find the top. Gate locked, no latch on the outside. They squeezed through the bars and found a hall full of giants, and at the head table, a king who introduced himself as Loki, and who welcomed them with the specific warm courtesy of someone who has already won and is enjoying the interval before anyone else figures this out. No one of small reputation was permitted to stay without proving their quality in some contest. I need to pause here because this section is one of my favorites in all of Norse mythology, and I'm aware I'm going to rush it slightly out of sheer excitement about where it goes, so I want to slow down and actually let each piece land. Loki went first, said he could eat faster than anyone alive, a trough of roasted meat, a slender opponent named Logi at the other end. They met in the middle at roughly the same moment, except Loki had consumed the meat, the bones, and the wooden trough beneath them. Loki had eaten only the meat. Thialfi ran against a youth named Hugin. 3 heats. By the third, it wasn't close. Thor drank from the great horn of the hall, once, twice, 3 times, each pull reducing the level by what felt like a vast amount, until you looked at it from outside and understood it had barely dropped. He tried to lift the cat from the floor. The cat arched until its spine curved toward the ceiling, and its paws seemed to press into every corner of the room simultaneously, as if it had decided to become structural. Thor managed, with everything he had, to raise a one paw. He wrestled an old woman named Ellie. She put him to one knee with the calm economy of someone who has won this particular match many times before and stopped finding it interesting. That evening, they were fed and housed well. In the morning, Loki walked them outside the walls, and here is the turn that the story has been building toward. And I find that I can't describe my feeling about it precisely. Something between delight and unease, the way a magic trick makes you feel when you understand the mechanics but still can't shake the effect. He told them what had actually happened. Skrymir had been himself throughout, the food sack sealed by iron spellwork, not ordinary rope. The 3 hammer blows had struck a hillside, and the dents they cut were deep enough to swim in and have been called valleys since. In the hall, Loki was Wildfire wearing a human shape, and Wildfire eats everything including the vessel that holds it. Hugin was thought itself, and no foot has ever outrun thought, not even Thialfi's. The great horn had been joined to the ocean, and Thor's 3 pulls had dropped the sea level measurably. Men had noticed afterward that the shore had moved, and given the phenomenon a plain descriptive name, tide. The cat was the Midgard serpent, folded into a convenient form, and when Thor raised one paw, he had shifted the coils that ring the earth, and the sky had briefly changed color from it. Which, I'll be honest, I kept this detail not because I could justify it, but because it is the kind of detail that feels true in a way that bypasses argument. And Ellie, old age. No man has ever thrown old age. Loki had staged the whole encounter in illusion because he would not expose his hall or his people to a direct meeting with Thor. Thor went white-faced toward him with the hammer. Anyway, Loki raised one hand. The fortress, the walls, the hall, every occupant, gone like frost on a warm stone, like they'd been a held breath released. The plain lay open, silent. The air was very clear. Thor stood there with the hammer and nothing to swing it at, and a lesson that would take. The story doesn't say how long it took to settle. I think that's the right choice. Some things take the time they take. He had not won a single contest. The giants of that country had needed to wrap every moment of his presence in continuous enchantment, just to manage him. There is a kind of winning inside that, even when it is genuinely difficult to feel like one. Thor woke and reached for the hammer. Nothing. He lay in the silence and let the absence arrive fully before he sat up. A world without Mjolnir is Midgard with the front door gone. Everything that has been circling the walls, waiting, is now circling an open threshold. He found Loki, said it plainly. The hammer was gone. Loki went to Freya. She didn't ask what for. She opened a chest and gave him the falcon cloak, the one that lets its wearer move through air the way a current moves through water, which is a simile I'm aware doesn't quite work because currents move through water by being water, but I kept it because it gestures at the right thing, the effortlessness of it, the belonging to the medium. And Loki shook it on and became a bird with a purposeful eye and flew east, over the boundary forest, over the cold mountains, until he found a giant sitting on a burial mound, braiding gold cord for his dog's leash, smoothing the manes of his horses with the particular satisfaction of a man who has recently made a very good acquisition and is letting himself enjoy the fact. The giant's name was Thrymer. Loki perched and asked the question. Thrymer didn't prevaricate. He had taken the hammer. He had put it 8 leagues underground. He would return it when Freya came to his hall as his bride. That was the offer. Take it or leave it. Loki turned in the air and flew for Asgard. When Thor heard the terms, he went to Freya immediately, and before he could phrase the request, she understood it and refused it. The great necklace, Brisingamen, shook on her chest with the force of what she was feeling. She would not. The room felt it. That's all the story gives us on that point, and I think that's correct. The refusal is complete, and the story has the sense not to interrogate it. The gods sat in emergency council. Heimdallr spoke. Heimdallr, who sees forward as easily as backward, whose patience with the present moment comes from knowing clearly where it is going. He laid out the solution with the calm of someone describing something already accomplished. Dress Thor as the bride, put Brisingamen on his chest, hang household keys at his belt, veil the face, send Loki as the bridesmaid. Thor said the halls would never stop laughing. Loki said there would be no halls left to laugh in. They dressed him with the care you give a weapon being transported into difficult terrain. They covered what needed covering. They adjusted the angle of the veil. Keys at the girdle in the way of a woman with a large and well-managed household. Loki tucked a knife into the maid's clothes because even handmaids benefit from options. I need to pause here because this is the part of the story that I find I cannot tell neutrally. And I've stopped trying to. There is something going on in this episode that is genuinely funny and also genuinely consequential, and the Norse held both of those things in the same hand without dropping either, and I find that difficult to replicate on the page. The comedy is real, the stakes are real, the dignity being sacrificed is real, and the reason it's being sacrificed is real, and Thor knows all of it and goes anyway. I don't know how to describe that without sentimentalizing it, so I'll just say, he went. The chariot crossed the sky toward Thrymer's hall. The mountains shuddered as they came. Torches lit inside, giants assembling, a wedding feast laid on long tables. Thrymer's hall, high, rough-edged, lit with the satisfaction of a man who believes he is about to receive exactly what he wants. He came out to meet the party with a grin that had taken some time to finish arranging itself on his face. The feast was served. An ox, whole roasted, fish by the platter, 8 barrels of mead. The bride worked through it with a dedication that quieted the hall. By degrees, an entire ox, 8 salmon, every sweet that had been set on the table. 3 barrels empty before the 4th was opened. Thrymr leaned to the bridesmaid in a low voice and said he had never seen a woman eat quite like this. The bridesmaid said with great sympathy and gentleness that the bride had not eaten in 8 days. So overcome was she with longing to come to Jotunheimer. The Kummer found this completely plausible and nodded with the gratified expression of a man receiving confirmation of his desirability. He leaned in for the kiss and lifted the veil and looked into eyes that burned like 2 coals catching a sudden draft. He slid backward. The bridesmaid explained that the bride had also not slept in 8 nights. Such was the intensity of her anticipation. The giants laughed, relaxed, reached for their cups, and here is where Thrymr did something that I find, I don't know the right word, inadvertently correct. He called for the hammer to be brought out, because a marriage must be consecrated in the old serious way, and he wanted Mjolnir laid in the bride's lap to hallow the union. 4 servants carried it in as though it was something holy, which it was. They placed it across the bride's knees. Anyway, the hands that closed around the handle had held that handle before, in every weather, in every emergency. For as long as the hammer had existed, those hands and that handle had found each other. The veil came off. The sound that filled the hall made the torches lean away from it. Thor stood in the wedding dress with Mjolnir in his hand and swung it, and Thrymr's skull cracked. And I want to say cracked like something, like ice, like stone. But every comparison I reach for is smaller than the fact. So I'll leave it as it cracked, and he fell. And Thor turned to the rest of the assembled hall and gave them what his hands provide. Loki shed the maid's costume and kept moving because the situation had resolved from requiring cleverness into requiring speed. They walked out into the clear night, chariot waiting, goats shaking their heads, the road home short in triumph, Brisingamen back around Freya's neck, keys back on their hooks, Mjolnir back on the belt where it belongs. No one stood on a table that night and performed the full story. They laughed over cups in the privacy of friendship, the kind of laughter that comes after something genuinely difficult has been accomplished by means that were genuinely undignified, and the dignity of how you arrived somewhere has never counted for as much as the dignity of what you came back carrying. The hammer hallows. The old tales were careful about this, returned to it, made sure you understood it before moving on. It blesses marriages, births, the threshold of a new house. When Thrymr demanded it as part of the wedding ceremony, he demonstrated that even giants understand its sanctity. They simply intend to use what is sacred for private ends whenever they can. That impulse runs through this mythology like a fault line. He watches for it constantly. He condemns it every time. Loki's place among the gods had always been a held breath, a hospitality extended on the assumption that the guest would behave better tomorrow than he had yesterday, extended again the day after that, extended for a very long time, before the assumption finally broke. He had sworn blood brotherhood with Odin in some earlier chapter the poems mention but declined to describe, and that bond kept him inside the fence of the divine household, even when his nature pulled toward the open ground beyond it. His blood ran from the house of giants. His father was Fabauti, cruel striker. His mother, Laufey or Nal, names that carry lightness, the lightness of leaves and needles, small bendable things. In his nature, the giant's appetite and the trickster's cunning occupied the same space as a genuine brilliance that was, at its best, useful in ways nothing else could replicate, and at its worst, catastrophic in ways nothing else could match either. In the forest called Jarnvidr, Ironwood, he had kept a bond with a woman named Angerboda. Her name means the one who heralds sorrow, who offers grief. From that union came 3 children the gods recognized, from the first moment, as problems of a scale that required immediate decisions. The first was a serpent. Jormungandr came into the world small and cold and coiled. Odin looked at it once and understood what it would become, and he picked it up and threw it into the encircling ocean. Which is a solution the way moving a fire from one room to another is a solution. The fire is still burning, only elsewhere now, only someone else's immediate problem. In the ocean, the serpent grew, fed on whatever the deep provides, until its body stretched around the full circumference of Midgard, and its tail found its own mouth. The sea rose and fell around that encirclement like breath. Men who fished the deep sometimes reported a pale eye far below the keel, and became afterward more careful with their oaths. The second child was a wolf. Fenrir came into the world with a king's shoulders and an appetite that had no ceiling. The gods brought him to Asgard, reasoning that a foe kept in sight is safer than one lost in the dark, and watched him. Only Tyr fed him daily, carrying meat in both hands. Learning the sound of the wolf's breathing across seasons, the wolf grew as if the seasons were his bones. I need to pause here, because what I want to convey about Fenrir is something that the mythology actually does very deliberately, and that I think is worth slowing down for. He is not framed as evil. He is framed as large and getting larger, and the prophecies clustering around him are specific enough that the gods cannot pretend uncertainty. He is going to swallow the highest god. That's the fact they're working around. And everything they do from this point has the particular moral texture of people acting badly towards someone who has done nothing yet, for reasons they can't fully defend, except that they are afraid of what the future holds. That's uncomfortable. I think it's supposed to be. They brought a chain called leading, forged heavy as craftsman's pride, and framed it as a game, a compliment to his famous strength. The wolf allowed them to wind it around him. When they gave the signal, he surged once, and the chain broke like frost in the first warm morning of spring. The gods made appreciative sounds. They sent for the dwarves again. The second chain, Dromi, was heavier by a significant consideration. Fenrir eyed it with more respect. He allowed the binding, braced himself, and threw his full strength outward, calculated, not panicked, a deliberate expenditure. The last link flew and embedded in the trunk of a birch tree with a sound like a struck shield. The wolf shook the remaining links from his coat. The gods sent messengers to Svartalfheim and asked for something different. Something that could not be answered by strength. Because strength based on appearance can always be met by strength based on appearance, and they needed something else entirely. The dwarves asked for 6 ingredients: the sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, the spittle of a bird. These things exist. The sound a cat makes when it moves is real. It simply cannot be gathered. A woman's beard is possible in principle. The impossibility is practical, not theoretical, which is a meaningful distinction that I find. I don't know exactly why I find it as interesting as I do, but it feels like the Norse were saying something specific about what kind of power actually holds things. The power that looks like nothing. The strength in things that can't be located or weighed. Anyway, from those impossibilities the dwarves wove a ribbon, soft as summer cloth, smooth as the hair of a sleeping child, with a strength that bore no relationship to its appearance, which was the entire point, because the wolf had learned to answer what things looked like, and this looked like nothing at all. They named it Gleipnir, the one that opens, the deceit of something that seems to promise freedom. The gods brought Gleipnir to a lake called Amsvartnir, dark and still, and to the island within it called Lyngvi, and they presented it to Fenrir as the next natural test. The wolf examined it, light as a sash, smooth as a promise. He felt, and here the story credits him with exactly this. With the instinct of something that has survived by reading its environment correctly, he felt the cold that tells a hunter when the ground has been prepared. He said he would allow the binding on one condition. One of the gods must place a hand in his mouth as a pledge. If the ribbon held by trickery rather than honest strength, he would have at least the satisfaction of an honest payment in return. The gods looked at each other. The silence had a specific quality to it, the quality of people who understand exactly what is being asked and are calculating exactly what it will cost. And this is the moment. I've thought about this moment a great deal, more than is probably warranted. This is the moment where the mythology shows its hand about what it actually values. Because what it takes is not cleverness, and not strength, and not a technical solution. What it takes is someone willing to put their hand in a wolf's mouth and hold it there. Tyr put his hand in. The ribbon was wound. Gleipnir held. The wolf pulled against something that had no yield in it, and understood what had been done. He bit down. Tyr lost his hand. The wolf was bound on the island with a cord through a great slab of stone driven into the earth, and a sword propped between his jaws to hold them open. And there he lies, howling sometimes, waiting with the patience of something that knows the age is moving toward it. The saliva that falls from his open mouth has become a river called Van, hope, which is a detail I've sat with many times and still can't decide what to do with. Whether it's cruel or generous or simply true, the river of a bound wolf spit is named Hope. I kept it because I couldn't leave it out. The third child was Hel, and she went into Helheimer, which you already know, which we've already been. 3 children, 3 decisions, the serpent thrown into the sea, the wolf bound on a dark island at the cost of a god's hand, the daughter placed over the dead. None of it resolved. All of it still running, still breathing, still waiting for the age to arrive at the point it's always been moving toward. The tree holds, still holds, silence on the island. The gods looked at the ribbon and the wolf and each other. Then Tyr moved. He had fed this animal with his own hands for years, carried meat in both hands, season after season, learning the sound of that breathing. He held out his right hand, the one that draws the sword, the one he would need from this day forward to finish anything he started. The wolf lowered his enormous head and closed his teeth around it, gently, while the gods wound Gleipnir around his legs and shoulders and neck and cast the ends through the stone. Fenrir tested the ribbon. It tightened. He pushed harder and it grew tighter still, and he threw himself outward with everything he had, claws in the earth, a sound that moved through the island like a question the stone couldn't answer. And Gleipnir held the way something holds that is made of what force cannot locate, that has no surface for strength to find. He understood. He lay panting and understood that he had been caught by cleverness, and more painfully, by a pledge he had requested himself. His eyes went to Tyr. Tyr held the gaze. The wolf bit down. The hand came away at the wrist and fell in the heather. They anchored the binding further, Gelgir, through the slab of rock called Gjörl, through to the boulder called Thviti, so that no convenient shift of fate could undo what the dwarves had made with so long an art, a sword between the open jaws. And he lay there on that dark island, looking up at the clouds with yellow patience, counting them, and the foam from his open jaws ran out and made a river they named Von, Hope. I've said this already, and I'll say it again because I still haven't settled it. The river of hope in this mythology runs from the mouth of a bound wolf. That's where it comes from. Make of that what you will. I haven't. He lies there still, waiting for the age to turn far enough. I need to collect the thread here, because we are moving now into the part of the story that I find I want to be precise. The part I find hardest to tell at the right speed, not because it's complicated, because it matters more than the earlier parts and keeps asking to be rushed. And I keep refusing, and the effort of refusing is visible to me in how I'm writing this. So I'll just say it plainly. Balder. We're coming to Balder. And I want you to understand what Balder is before we arrive at what happens to him. Among the halls of Asgarda, there was one that stood apart for its whiteness, its cleanliness, its quality of having been built from the ground up to contain nothing that didn't belong there. Breidablik, broad gleaming. Balder kept his court there. He was, and here I want to avoid the easy words, the radiant, the golden, the beloved, because they're all true and they all flatten him slightly. He was the thing that kept Asgarda's temperature right. Anger found it harder to harden into decision in his presence. Grief stayed proportionate. He was the warm center that stopped the hall from running too cold or too hot. And you only understand what a thing like that is worth when it's gone, which is, I think, the entire point the story is making. And it makes it slowly and carefully and in full. When he began to dream of death, the hall went quiet. The dreams were specific. A seat prepared below the roots with his name on it. A mead bench freshly washed. He could smell the cold of it. He spoke of them plainly, the way Balder spoke of everything, directly, without performance. And the plainness of it made the news land harder than fear ever does. Frigg went out and did what only a mother does. She walked the 9 worlds and asked each thing in turn to swear an oath that it would not harm her son. Fire swore, water swore, iron swore, and every metal that remembers the forge. Stone swore, earth swore, illness, poison, the beasts on foot and the birds on wing, trees and vines and every creeping thing. She came back carrying a net of promises that covered every force and substance she could name. The gods turned it into a game. They set Balder at the center of the field before Breidablik and demonstrated the world's faithfulness by testing it. Spears thrown and turned in the air before they reached him. Stones arched towards him and fell harmless at his feet. Swords struck flat, left nothing. Arrows refused their target. The benches laughed with genuine relief, and even the servants came out to watch, because watching something beloved be harmless is one of the simpler pleasures the world offers. It was Loki who noticed the gap. He attended the game with the close attention of someone always looking for where the fence doesn't quite meet the post. He took the shape of an old woman and sat near Frigg's place and asked mildly, conversationally, whether every creature and thing had sworn. Frigg said yes, all had, except a small mistletoe on a north-facing trunk, which had seemed too young and too harmless to bother approaching. Loki thanked her and left. Anyway, he found the mistletoe, cut it. In his hands it hardened from twig to dart, which I've tried to imagine as a physical event and can't. Quite. It's one of those mythological facts that insists on being accepted rather than pictured. And he polished the point on his sleeve and walked back to the field. Herder stood at the edge of the celebration, Balder's blind brother, standing with the expression of someone waiting patiently to be included in something that keeps not including him. And if you have ever stood at the edge of something like that, you will recognize the expression. And you will recognize also exactly what kind of opening Loki was walking toward when he came over with the soft approach of someone offering a simple kindness. He could guide Herder's throw, he said, so that the brother could honor Balder the same as everyone else. Herder held out his hand. Loki placed the mistletoe in it, guided the aim, told him when to throw. The dart flew straight, struck Balder in the chest, and went in as if the body had been waiting for something to complete it. He fell the way a great tree falls when the axe has found the place past which no wood holds, all at once and heavily, and without the option of reconsidering on the way down. The field went completely still. Then the gods ran forward, touched him, called his name, and none of the names worked anymore. Frigg sank to her knees and held his head. Odin stood with his one eye as empty as a winter sky above a frozen field. Thor's hand on the hammer left marks in the wood it pressed against. Someone lifted Herder's hand, saw the mistletoe, understood what had happened, understood who. Loki was already gone from that spot. Grief in Asgarda had a plan inside it almost immediately, because these are gods, and gods do not sit with loss the way ordinary people sit with it. They move, they act, they find the mechanism. The terms that Hermodr had brought back from hell could still be met. If everything in all the worlds wept for Balder, hell would release him. Messengers rode in every direction. The weeping was general and real. Stone wept, grass wept, iron wept. The sea wept in the way that seas weep, which is by making larger waves than usual, which I recognize sounds almost comic, but the text states it plainly, and I think the plainness is the point. Everything lowered its head for Balder. the messengers came finally to a cave where a giantess sat. Her name was Thok. They asked for her tears. She refused. Balder had given her neither joy in life nor joy in death, she said. Hell was welcome to whatever she kept. Those who read riddles with an ill will say Thok was Loki. One more shape. Whether that's literally true, the refusal served his purpose as fully as if he had arranged it himself and signed it. Balder remained below. I need to pause here because the next section, Loki's capture, is one I find I can write efficiently or I can write it properly, and I keep choosing efficiently and then going back. So, properly. The gods hunted him with the thoroughness that grief and rage together made possible, which is a thoroughness with no ceiling and no stopping point. He had built a house on a high mountain with 4 doors, one for each direction, so he could see approach from anywhere. By day he hid in a river pool at the mountain's foot in the shape of a salmon. One evening he sat by his fire and wove a net from fine cord, passing the time, just passing the time. And then he saw the gods cresting the ridge and threw the net into the fire so it wouldn't betray him, and ran. They entered the house, found the ash outline of something they hadn't seen before, something in the shape of the net, still readable in the char. Kvasir, present in the mead, in the knowing the mead carried. Understood from that shape what Loki had been making. They wove a net from the pattern in the ash and went to the river. First cast, he went under it, lay on the gravel and let them pass over him. They waited the lead line, cast again. He leapt for the open sea. Thor waded out below the falls and stood in the current with his hands open, because that is how Thor solves problems. He goes to where the problem will have to pass through, and he opens his hands and he waits. The salmon came through. Thor closed his grip. The fish twisted and nearly slipped free. The grip held at exactly the pressure required. This, the story says, is why salmon taper toward the tail. I've never decided whether that's charming or unsettling. Both, probably. Anyway, they brought him to a cave, stripped him of his shape, bound him across 3 stones, shoulders, loins, knees, and the cords hardened into iron. Skadi fixed a serpent above his face so that venom fell onto his brow. Drop by drop, Sigyn came, his wife. She sat beside him and held a bowl up to catch the drops. When the bowl filled, she had to rise and carry it away, and in those moments, the drops fell freely. And the pain that went through him was so total that the whole earth shuddered with it. This is where earthquakes come from, in the lore of the North. The sound of venom striking the floor of a cave, and a bound god's response. He lay there, waited. Let me collect the thread, because after Balder's death and Loki's binding the story, changes register, and I wanted to make sure we arrive at that change at the right speed. After the burning and the binding, the world began to lean, the way a tree leans before it goes. Not all at once, not with drama, but with an accumulating weight the roots can feel long before the crown gives any visible sign. The ash groaned more often. The Norns poured their water and clay with a concentration that implied urgency. In Midgard, old women woke from dreams of wolves on every horizon, and men who had fished the sea, their whole lives started finding reasons to stay on shore. Then Fimbulvetur, the great winter, 3 consecutive winters, each beginning before the last had ended, snow driving from every direction at once. Not a season, but a policy. the cold arriving with the decisiveness of something that has decided to stay. Crops failed. Kindling ran out because no one dared cut the last trees. And the worst damage was not to the harvest. It was to kinship. Brothers took axes to brothers. Fathers and sons settled old scores and called them debts. Guests were met with drawn blades. The warmth went out of human relations as completely as it went out of the weather. And I find that specific detail, that the myth connects the cold outside to the cold between people, that it refuses to treat those as separate. I find that the most frightening thing in it, more frightening than the wolves, more frightening than the ending, that kinship goes first. The wolves that had been chasing the sun and moon since the beginning closed the distance. The sun went out in a great bite. The moon followed. The stars that had been fixed in Ymir's skull since the brothers set them there shook themselves loose and fell. 3 roosters crowed in the dark. Gullinkambi, golden, on the roof of Valhall. A bird called Fjallar, answering from a red wood in Jotunheimr. And deep in Hell's realm, a soot-black rooster calling to the army that had been waiting in shadow longer than anyone had thought to count. The earth shook. Mountains split along faults older than the gods. Caverns opened. Nidhöggr, down at the root, worked faster. Garm tore free from Gnibberhellir, and his howling made every timber in every hall in every world vibrate with something like recognition. On the dark island, the ribbon that had held Fenrir since before many had memory of it simply ceased, stopped functioning. The 6 impossible ingredients returning quietly to the 6 impossible places they had come from. Gleipnir just let go, as if it had always known this was the moment it had been made for. Fenrir rose, stretched, opened his jaws until the lower jaw scraped the earth and the upper pressed toward the sky, until the space between them was the size of a world trying to decide whether to keep existing. And the answer he gave it was his own, and it had been waiting in him since the day they bound him. Since the day the foam from his mouth ran down and became a river they named Hope, and the name was always both a comfort and a warning. And now you know which it was. In the encircling ocean, Jörmungandr lifted from the floor of the deep and moved toward shore. His coils made new waves. The poison on his tongue turned the air around it to something that burned the eyes and tasted of what comes after everything else. From the south, Surt, finally. After standing at the border of Muspelsheimer since before patience needed a name, he moved. He rode at the head of a company whose armor caught the last available light and turned it into something spectacular and terrible. I want to say their armor blazed like a second sun, but there was no sun anymore, which is the precise problem, which is why that image fails, which is why I'm leaving it there half broken as a record of the attempt. His sword burned brighter than the sun that was gone. He set his feet on Bifrost. The rainbow bridge cracked and fell because it was built for the gods' daily traffic, and the full weight of apocalypse is a different load entirely. From the north came Naglfar under black sails, the ship made in hell from the nail clippings of the dead, which is why the old custom held that you should always trim your nails before burial to slow the completion of that vessel by even a little, to deprive it of a sliver of material, which strikes me every time I say it as one of the most quietly human things in the whole mythology, that the living did something small and careful with their fingernails to slow the ending of the world, and apparently did it faithfully. For a very long time, Hreimr held the helm. The dead walked behind Loki, who had slipped his binding when the earth shook hard enough, and their faces were pale and composed and patient, the expressions of people arriving at an appointment they have been holding in their calendars for a very long time. I need to pause here, because what I want to do is linger on each of these arrivals, give each one the attention its centuries of waiting seem to deserve. And I'm aware that the story's own momentum is working against me right now, pulling toward the field, pulling toward the plain, and I want to resist that pull for just a moment and acknowledge that this is the part of the story where everything the whole mythology has been building since Ymir fell and the brothers built a world from his body is arriving at once. And the scale of that simultaneous arrival is something I find genuinely difficult to hold in prose without it going either numb or overwrought. I've been trying for years to describe Ragnarok at the right pitch. I'm trying again tonight. Yggdrasil shook from root to crown. The eagle at the top screamed. The four stags stampeded through the high branches. Ratatoskr fell silent. For the first time in the history of the world, the squirrel had nothing to carry and no one to carry it to. Dwarves stood in their doorways and mourned in the language of stone, which is very slow and very heavy and takes a long time to finish. The Einherjar rose from Valhall's 540 doors simultaneously, weapons already in hand. They had been training for this every day since Odin chose them, eating and fighting and eating again. And the day they had trained for was now, and they went through the doors into the dark without hesitation, which is, I find that detail almost unbearable in a way I can't fully articulate. The dedication of it, the purpose. Heimdallr lifted Gjallarhorn. The sound that went out was made of the same material as the first moment of creation. It passed across all 9 worlds at once, in every language without requiring translation. Everyone understood. Odin went to Mimir's well one last time, stood over the dark water, looked down at his own eye, still there, still looking back up at him. He didn't ask for victory. He asked to be fully awake for what was coming. That's what I find. That's the choice that undoes me slightly every time, and I've stopped trying to dress it up. He went to the well, not to ask how to win, but to ask to be present for what was going to happen, to not miss any of it, even the part where he lost. He went home, put on the black armor, took Gungnir, called his sons, called the heroes of Valhall, and went out through the Golden Gate. The field was called Vigridr, 100 leagues across, the Norse way of saying large enough to contain everything that needed to be settled. Anyway, Odin rode at the front with his ravens still wheeling and the household wolves at his sides. Gungnir leveled, the point drawing a line through smoke and dark toward the widest open mouth in any story ever told. Fenrir came through the dark with the expression he had worn since the island. Patient, certain. His mane threw sparks from what remained of the broken bridge. The spear flew. The wolf came through it. The jaws closed. Odin went down. No cry. Vidar moved. The silent sun. He had never spoken in his entire existence. Had spent an age making himself ready for a single act. And the act was this. He stepped into the wolf's shadow and placed his thick-soled boot on the lower jaw. The boot had been built across all of mortal history from every scrap of leather trimmed from the edges of shoes, which is why cobblers were always told to set those scraps aside. The boot was assembled from the accumulated careful acts of many human hands over many human lifetimes, and that is what made it sufficient. And I've thought about this image more than almost any other in the mythology. The idea that the gods needed something made of human effort, specifically human effort, the patient, small, daily kind, to finish what they couldn't finish alone. Whether that's true in any theological sense, I can't say. But it's in there. It's in the story. He took the upper jaw in his hand and tore. In other tellings, he drives a sword through the heart while the boot holds. All versions agree on the outcome. The wolf fell. Bidar stood in the silence after, blood on his boot, with the expression of someone who has done the only thing they ever came to do. Thor faced Jörmungandr at the water's edge. Poison blackened the ground where it fell from the serpent's breath. Shields buckled, thunder moved with the hammer, and the sky shook with the exchange between them. The two oldest adversaries of the middle world, the god who guarded it and the creature that encircled it. Finally arriving at the meeting they had been appointed for since the wolf chase began at the birth of time. Mjolnir struck. The flash lit the far mountains. The serpent died. Thor took 9 steps. On the 9th, he fell. The venom had been working through him across the whole length of the battle, patient as Fenrir had been patient. And on the 9th step, it finished its work. He went down with his hand still on the handle. The hammer lay beside him, quiet, as if it understood what the knight had asked of it and had given exactly that, and was done. Tyr met Garm on the open ground between the armies. The hound moved with the efficiency of something held past the point of patience. All that howling in the cave finally converted into motion, and they fought and tore each other and fell together on the stripped earth. Where they died, the grass did not grow again. I've kept that detail across every version of this I've told, and I keep it because it's the only description I've found of what a particular kind of courage leaves behind, the kind that meets what it knows will destroy it and continues anyway. It marks the ground remembers. Freyr stood before Surtur without his great sword, which he had given away once as a wedding gift, a pledge of love that had seemed worth the price and hadn't called it back. He fought with a hunter's curved blade instead, and he held his own against a burning sword for a long time before Surtur's weapon found its answer. A long time. The story is specific about this. He fought well and he fought long, and without the weapon that might have changed the outcome. And the thing the Norse were saying with that detail is something I find harder to compress into a sentence the later it gets. That the gift given with your whole heart was worth giving. That he went to that field knowing what he'd traded away, and he went anyway. So there, Heimdall and Loki found each other in the smoke. The watchman who sees everything coming and the one who makes everything complicated. The two who had been the opposing poles of the divine household since before the war that started it all. They met in the fallen shields and the dark, and they wounded each other deeply, and they fell together. This satisfies something in me, even in its sadness. It completes a shape that had been open since the beginning. A shape you don't notice is open until it closes. And then Surtur's sword swept wider and wider. Fire taking what the flood had left, the sky splitting as a roof splits when the main beam gives way, mountains running liquid, the sea rising one last time and then pulling back as the last ember went out. The great ash burning from crown to root, the Norn's hands going empty of white clay, the wells going still. I need to pause here, just for a moment, because this is the part of the story I have the most difficulty with. Not the deaths, which are clear, but the burning of the tree, which the text states plainly, and I still can't make land with the weight it deserves. Yggdrasil burns, the thing that has been tended every morning since the beginning, painted with white clay and sacred water by 3 women who got up every day specifically to prevent this, burns anyway. The Norn's work was always a delay. The tree held as long as it held, and then it didn't. I've sat with that for a long time. I don't have a resolution for it. I just have the fact of it. The darkness held for what the poems declined to measure, because time had ended and had not yet found its way back. Then smoke thinned. Ash settled on a sea that lay still. From a silence with no bottom, something gathered, and the world began again. Green came first, grass across slopes that had been cinders, tentative, pale, and relentlessly present, the way grass always is when you think about it, the way it comes back through asphalt and through rubble, and apparently through the aftermath of everything, which is its most important quality, and the one that gets least attention. Bracken and rowan pushing up from the black soil, rivers running clear and quick, carrying none of the weight the rivers of the old age had carried. Over a ridge to the west, an eagle came and flew on an updraft from a new falls and searched the water below with the eye that has been doing exactly this since before most things were named. The sun rose, the daughter of the sun, who had been hidden away before the end came, who stepped into her mother's path with the practical competence of a successor who has had time to prepare. The chariot moved. Day came back without apology. Night came back with a gentler face. The seasons found their positions. Anyway, on Yggdrasil, which had been Asgarder's council plane, and was now simply the high place where survivors could locate each other. They gathered, a small group, enough. Vidar came from where the wolf had fallen, Vali with him. Modi and Magni arrived with the goats, Thor's goats somehow intact, shaking their ears as if nothing unusual had occurred, which is one of those details I find either deeply comforting or slightly absurd, depending on the hour. And they carried Mjolnir with them. They had found it on the field. The hammer had outlasted the hand that threw it, lying there patient in the grass, waiting for someone to pick it up and carry it forward, which is what tools do, which is what tools have always done. Hönir came, slow and grave, with a staff and the expression of someone conducting a very careful inventory of what remains. And then, and this is the part of the ending I find I cannot rush through, the part that keeps stopping me even now late, with all of this behind us, from the paths that lead up from shadow, walking side by side, the ease of people who have had time to settle something between them, came Balder and Herda, released when the old bindings loosened with the breaking of almost everything else. The brothers who had been separated by a dart of mistletoe and a blind throw walked back onto the sunlit field together, and the sight of them, I don't have the right word for what the sight of them does to the air around them in the story. Something steadies, something that had been held at a particular pitch of grief since the field when still releases. And I'm aware this is the kind of thing that can tip into sentiment very quickly, and I'm trying to stay on the right side of that line. But they came back, together, in the new grass, scattered across Yggdrasil, as though the field had been holding them in trust. Gold. The game pieces of the old days. No one had buried them. The earth had simply kept them and now gave them back, and the survivors picked them up out of the grass and looked at them and laughed. It was the first sound made in the new age without smoke in it. In a thicket called Hodmimi's Holt, a man and a woman had sheltered through the sword and the flood. Their names were Leaf and Lifthrasir, life and the one who clings to life. They had eaten morning dew when there was nothing else. They stepped out now into new sun. They were not afraid. From their hunger and their gladness, a people began. The eagle flew, the rivers ran, the grass kept coming. The story had been told. The halls of their afterworld arranged themselves. Gimle shone with a light that doesn't come from any star. Brimmer offered ale that doesn't sour. Sindri gleamed for those who love careful work and long hours and the specific satisfaction of a thing made exactly right. And Nastran remained, the shore of the dead, walls made from the spines of oath-breakers, roof dripping, because the new world, like the old one, required that consequence exist, that the boundary between a kept promise and a broken one carry actual weight. The Norse built that into the new age the same way they built it into the old one. They didn't forget. The great ash had burned, but from the charred trunk thin leaves came. From the crown, a new whisper ran down into the centuries that were just beginning to form. The wells had not forgotten themselves. Udr remained, Verdandi remained, Skuld remained. 3 women still drew water and poured it on bark that needed tending, because that is the nature of anything worth tending. It requires daily attention, and the daily attention is the point, not the product. The new age had its gods, Vidar and Vali, Modi and Magni, who had inherited, Balder and Herder, who had come back, Hörner, slow and grave, who had always seen more than he said. The same qualities in new hands, same work in a new season, and in the customs that men carried from one world into the next. The hammer sign worn under the shirt, the rune cut on a lintel, the cup poured into the river before asking it to carry you. The old ones traveled as principles, as the accumulated understanding of a people who had learned through a very long story what holds and what breaks and what the difference looks like when the pressure comes. A world can end and begin again. I need to pause here because we've arrived at the part of this telling I find most difficult to close, which is the part where the mythology stops being story and starts being something that happened to a culture across centuries, something that got copied and carved and sung and gradually changed under pressures it hadn't anticipated. And I want to try to say something true about that passage without making it sound more tidy than it was. Stories survive because people decided to carry them. Before any book, there was a voice, a skald in a firelit hall with winter at the eaves, turning the events of the age into song, teaching listeners to hear a ship as the horse of the sea, to hear gold as the serpent's bed, to hear blood as the mead of swords. These kennings, these compressed, demanding metaphors, are a discipline. They ask the listener to hold two images simultaneously and find where they overlap, and in that overlap to understand something that neither image alone could carry. This is a skill. It requires practice. The people who developed it across generations were doing something I find genuinely extraordinary, which is teaching their audiences to think in a specific way, to understand connection and analogy as the primary mode of making sense of things. And I am aware that I spend a great deal of time being interested in this when I should probably be moving on, but I'm not going to apologize for it. The runes were cut into wood and stone and metal, on grave markers and door lintels, and on amulets worn close to the skin. A common inscription asked Thor to hallow. On one stone, a small hammer was cut where another tradition would have placed a cross. On another, a memorial charm ran along the edge in the thin, angular script of someone who believed that words properly arranged could hold what grief alone cannot. Small gold foils pressed into pairs of embracing figures, guldgubbar they're called, memory of Vanir rites, a blessing performed in miniature by hands that knew what they were keeping. Anyway, the image stones of Gotland. And this is where I linger. This is where the uneven affection in me becomes visible, whether I intend it or not. Show a man fishing from a boat with an ox head for bait and a great coil rising from below. Thor's fishing trip, cut into flat grey stone by someone who wanted to make sure the image survived in a form the weather couldn't easily take. The Gosforth Cross in northern England carries on a single shaft both the new faith and the last battle, eight-legged horse, serpent fight, wolf, cut by hands that may have held both traditions without finding them contradictory, which is either a beautiful accommodation or a complicated one, depending on what you think traditions owe each other. I'm not going to settle that here. Iceland, which kept its laws in the throat of the law speaker, and later on vellum, gave us the great poems. The Codex Regius with the seeress's prophecy, a woman describing the shape of time from beginning to end in return for rings, which is the most complete account of everything we've spent tonight inside. The sayings of the High One, where Odin gives practical advice and occasional autobiography in the same breath. The speeches of Vafthrudnir, where a god and a giant argue riddles about the structure of the world. And the question of who knows more about the ending is the whole contest. Snorri Sturluson wrote the Prose Edda as a handbook for poets losing their references. Who was Aegir? And why is the sea called his mead? What connects the eagle to the dwarves? Why does a king get called a ring tree? He preserved the myths because he feared they'd be lost under the pressure of the incoming faith, and he was right to fear it. He opened with a prologue, dressing the gods as Trojan princes so the bishops wouldn't object. And then, in the body of the work, he told the stories as they had always been told, with the frankness and the humor and the darkness kept intact. I think about him sometimes, Snorri, up late with the vellum, writing the prologue he didn't believe so that he could write the body he did. The same gesture those monks made when they copied the old stories after the faith had changed, the preserving of a thing you may not share because you can feel that it matters. It's a kind of love, a professional, complicated, possibly self-serving love. But love. The days of the week kept the names. Tuesday, Tyr, the one-handed judge who put his hand in the wolf's mouth and held it there and lost it and did not call that a mistake. Wednesday, Odin, the terrible, the one-eyed, the one who hung in the dark until the runes came up. Thursday, Thor, who wades the rivers so the bridge doesn't have to carry his weight, who hallows the threshold with the hammer, who takes 9 steps after the serpent falls and on the 9th goes down. Friday, a goddess whose name the Angles and the Norse said slightly differently, but whose nature stayed the same across the pronunciation. Love, knowledge, the insistence that desire is a form of attention that deserves to be honored. Every week the names come around again. Every week the old ones travel forward. That's the mythology. That's what the North has been telling, in mouths and on stone and on vellum, and now in this, for a very long time. It began in nothing. It moved through making and conflict and loss, and the particular courage of people who go forward knowing what's coming. It ended in a field with gold game pieces in the grass, and 2 brothers walking back into the sun together, and a man and a woman stepping out of a thicket into a new morning, hungry and unafraid. The grass kept coming. It kept coming. Place names held what the people believed. Fields and groves named for the gods who had presided over the events that shaped them. Those names persisting through changes of faith and language and political arrangement the way place names do, because they're attached to actual ground that people walk across every day, and actual ground is harder to rename than a doctrine. In winter, people spoke of a wild hunt across the night sky. Dogs and riders and a tall figure in a wide hat leading them, and parents told children to come inside when the wind turned in a particular way. At the midwinter feast, called by new names in the new age, but anchored to the same turning of the year, the same bottom of the dark before the light begins its slow return, fires were lit and gifts were given, and the figure walked through the snow. Because the deep customs of a people do not disappear when the surface changes. They go down. They persist in the body, in the bone, in the calendar, in the stories told to children before sleep, in the way certain kinds of weather feel familiar, in a way you can't quite account for. Which brings us back here, to this quiet hour, to your dark room, or your dim one, to the particular quality of attention you have been giving for the last however long, to a story that began in a void and has arrived by way of ice and blood and sacrifice and poetry and the specific courage of people who go forward knowing what's coming to this moment. I want to be honest with you about something before we close. I find these endings difficult to write. The closing of a long telling always feels, I want to say, it feels like folding something very large into a very small space. But that's not quite right. That simile doesn't seal. What it actually feels like is being asked to stop talking about something I'm not finished thinking about, which is a different problem entirely. So I'll just say what needs saying and try not to dress it up. The Norse were not a people who sweetened endings. They looked at the world's conclusion and described it clearly. Everything burned, the sea covered what the fire left. And then they looked at the morning after and described that too. Green grass, clear river, 2 people stepping out of a wood into light that belongs to them. Brothers separated by treachery, walking back onto the field together. The myths ask you to hold both, the burning and the grass, the loss and the return. They don't tell you the return cancels the burning. They tell you both happened and both were real. The question the myths ask is what you do in the time between the beginning and the end. Whether you keep your oaths. Whether you pay for wisdom at the price wisdom requires. Whether you hold out your hand for the wolf when no one else will, whether you trade your best sword for love and then fight anyway, and fight well, and go down eventually, and that be enough. The ash is tended every morning, the wells remember. The Norns pour white water on the bark, and the bark holds. And this is the daily work, and the daily work is the point. I need to pause here, because what comes next is the part I find hardest to say, without it sounding like a disclaimer, which it isn't. It's more important than that. These stories were not written in one moment by one hand with one intention. They arrived in fragments, kept by different people for different reasons across several centuries, gathered most completely in Iceland in the 12th and 13th centuries, by people recording a tradition already partly overlaid by a different faith. What we have is a selection, already shaped by the particular minds that chose what to preserve and the circumstances in which they preserved it. There was no complete original. There was a living, changing, breathing tradition of people in fire-lit halls telling what they knew to people who would eventually tell it to someone else. And what we have is where that river ran when someone decided to stop it on a page. Anyway, the Völuspá, the seeress's prophecy, is the single most complete account of everything we've moved through tonight, and it is a poem of such compression and beauty that I have read it many times and always find something I missed, something sitting quietly in a kenning waiting for me to be in the right mood to understand it. It is probably not quite the poem that was sung before anyone in that tradition had heard a Christian alternative. The faith that was coming changed the air the old stories lived in, changed which details seemed worth keeping, changed what the ending was supposed to feel like. This is true and worth knowing. None of it makes the stories less true. A story that has survived being spoken by many mouths and written by many hands and read in many circumstances, and which still carries something essential through all of that, has proved something about the durability of what it holds inside it. The stone tells you what it's made of by what the river couldn't dissolve, what this mythology is made of at its core. The world was assembled by hands from what was available. Every good thing in it was paid for at the actual price. Odin's wisdom cost an eye and 9 days of hanging from a tree in the dark. The hammer that defends the middle world was forged under sabotage and came out with a handle too short. The binding that held the wolf required a god to give his sword hand as a pledge and hold it there and lose it and stand afterward in the heather and not call it a mistake. The meed of poetry, the gift of saying the true thing in a way that makes it land, was brewed from a murder and stolen through a mountain and spat into vats and arrived at its destination with the few drops scattered in the fields below, which is why the mediocre also get to speak, which is the most honest thing the mythology says about art. Nothing comes clean. Nothing is given without cost. And yet, and this is the argument the whole long story makes, from Ginnungagap to the new grass on the new slopes, the world is worth the cost. The hall is worth building, even knowing it will burn. The oath is worth taking, even knowing you may be held to it at the worst possible time. The wisdom is worth buying, even at the price of your eye, and you walk away from the well sharpened, and you do not look back at what you left there, because it is seeing things now that your remaining eye will never reach. The story goes on. Sleep well. the Norns who pour water on the bark every morning before the gods ride out. Those 3 women at the well beside the great root, carving into wood, keeping the tree alive through the discipline of daily attention, are the image this mythology offers for what fate actually looks like. Not a wheel, not a blind mechanism turning in the dark, not a decree thundered from somewhere above the clouds. 3 women tending a tree every morning, because the tree will die without the attention, and if the tree dies, everything they have ever known goes with it. Fate, in this telling, is a maintenance problem. I've been sitting with that formulation for years, and I still think it's the most honest way to say it. More frightening and more bearable than the alternatives simultaneously, which is a combination the Norse were very comfortable living inside. More frightening because things can go wrong through neglect as easily as through catastrophe. Through a small flower overlooked on a winter walk, through a wager accepted without quite enough thought, through a chain of ordinary decisions, each of which seemed reasonable when it was made. More bearable because it means the daily work of tending is the actual mechanism. The fire kept burning, the oath honored, the food brought to the wolf even when the wolf is growing faster than you'd like. These are the acts that hold the world. The tree lives because someone pours water on it. The world holds because someone keeps the promise they made when making it was inconvenient. We have gone tonight, from the void to the morning after the ending. We watched the brothers make the world. We stood with the first man and the first woman while they blinked in the new light and looked around at a wall built from an eyebrow. We climbed the roots of the great ash. We drank from its wells. We met the squirrel and the eagle and the stags eating from the top and the serpent eating from the bottom, and the 3 women making the whole arrangement survivable through sheer persistence. We watched the gods make the mistakes that set tragedy in motion. The mistletoe overlooked, the wager accepted without enough thought, the dart that flew because a blind man was shown what looked like a kindness, the contract that required a trickster to spend a night in a birch grove in an undignified shape to prevent a payment no one could afford to make. I need to pause here at the edge of the ending because I want to say something about what it feels like to come to the end of a long telling, and I'm not sure I have the right words for it, which is ironic given that we just spend several hours inside a mythology that is largely about the cost of getting the right words and what happens when you don't. What I want to say is that I'm aware we have covered a very large amount of ground tonight, and that I am not sure all of it landed with the weight it deserves. And I have made my peace with that the way you make peace with anything too large to carry perfectly. You carry it as well as you can, and you set it down gently, and you hope some of it stays with whoever you handed it to. Anyway, we were with Odin at the dark well, on the tree in the wind. We heard the hammer leave the bridal lab and find the hands that had always been its destination. We watched the ribbon made from impossible things wrap around the wolf that could not break it because it contained nothing force could locate. We heard the roosters crow in the dark from 3 different directions and understood that sound as the signal it had always been, the one everyone present had been expecting and hoping would never come. We saw the jaws open, the bridge crack, the fire on the sword, and then the morning after. Survivors on the high field, gold pieces in the grass. The sun's daughter stepping without hesitation into her mother's path, which is a detail that strikes me as the bravest thing in the whole mythology, stepping into the orbit your mother held when wolves ate your mother. But I've decided that's my reading, and I'll leave it sitting there for you to decide what to do with. Two people coming out of a thicket into new light, hungry, not afraid. The story says, after the worst thing, there is still a morning, and in the morning, there are people who are hungry, and they build a fire, and someone has to keep the fire from going out, and someone has to go and look for food. And these are the acts that continue the world, small, daily, necessary. The same acts the Norns perform at the root of the ash before anyone else is awake. This is still the morning after every night. This is still the work. For those who wandered through the 9 worlds tonight, for those who followed the routes from Urdarbrunna to Vergelmir and back, who sat with Odin at the well and understood in the stomach, not just the head, what it cost to see clearly, wherever you are, whatever time it is where you are. I hope this found you somewhere comfortable. I hope the old words carried you somewhere that felt like rest, even if rest is not what the hour would normally offer you. I'm glad you were here for it. I mean that in the plainest possible way. The ravens fly out at dawn. They come back at evening. Thought and memory, returning with the grain of what the day held. What was dared, what was promised, what was tried in the dark. And Odin listens while the feast goes on around him, and he hears what they carry, and he holds it. Set the day down. You've carried it long enough. Good night.